Good morning. I will now call the September 28th San Diego County Board of Supervisors regular meeting to order. May I ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Before I call the roll, I'd like to note for the record that Supervisor Lawson Reamer is participating via teleconference. As such, all votes will be handled by a roll call vote. With that, I will now call the roll. Supervisor Anderson.
Here.
Supervisor Lawson Reamer. Supervisor Desmond.
Here.
Vice Chair Vargas.
Vargas here.
Chair Fletcher.
Fletcher here. First item on the order of business is report of any actions taken in closed session. I'll ask County Council to report on any actions if necessary.
No reportable actions from yesterday.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is non-agendized public communication. This is an opportunity for the public to address the board on matters that are within our jurisdiction but are not on today's agenda. The only action the Board of Supervisors may take is a referral to the Chief Administrative Officer. Reminder, according to Rule 4A, members of the public who are non-English speaking and need interpretation assistance will be allotted additional time to facilitate translation. According to the county's rules of procedure, we will hear from up to 5 in-person speakers and 5 virtual speakers. Any remaining request for non-agendized public communication will be resumed at the conclusion of our agendized business. I'll ask the clerk to call forward up to 5 in-person and 5 virtual speakers at this time.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We have 15 total requests to speak on matters not listed on the agenda. 6 in person and 9 by phone. For those that have requested to speak via phone, if you could please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that were provided to you. We will begin with the in-person speakers. As your name is called, if you could please come forward and stand against the east wall under the murals until it is your turn to speak. You will then have 2 minutes to address the board. And I would like to invite forward the following individuals: Bryant Rumba, Michael Brando, Oliver Twist, Rajesh, and Audra. You will have, if you could please state your name before beginning your comments.
All right, how is everybody? I'm Bryant Rumbaugh. It's good to see you again. It was 2 weeks ago that I initially came in here. And the last couple of weeks, I've actually gone to a couple of Board of Supervisor meetings, Riverside County as well as Orange County, really trying to get myself more involved and really how to fix a lot of things that I recognize as being, kind of problematic at this point in the game. The last time I talked to you guys, I talked to you about really trying to engineer a little bit more of a engaged society. And, I'm wanting to kind of, let's just say, keep the pressure on you guys, more or less, when I say that, simply meaning kind of be proactive and moving towards the goals. I think that people have goals on every side of the political aisle, Democrat, they call it right, left, whatever, people that are stuck in that paradigm still. We're all Americans, and America was a very unique opportunity for the world. We actually changed the world in many respects. And I'd like to see us take the opportunity to really choose a direction, demonstrate what leadership means to the world. And I've got some good ideas on that. I feel that they are. It's really the product of about 12 years of kind of, let's just say, me wargaming these things and kind of studying history, kind of studying, kind of the way that the modus operandi of the current system operates. And, so I wanted to make sure that I, made myself clear. I can tell you the Board of Supervisor meetings in Orange County and Riverside, it seems to be very congruent. They're battling a lot of the same problems that you guys are. It's really, it seems to me, it's all big money. Okay, it was kind of interesting, some of the things that went on yesterday at Orange County. Definitely there was some resistance to some of those contracts being awarded for isolation of homeless COVID patients. And they brought up, the PCR test and how they, for lack of a term, there was world leaders that tested fruit that tested positive for.
Thank you. We'll hear from the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, I'll see you guys again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Board. Oliver Twist here, bringing concerns again before you regarding backcountry fire safety. First, thank you for yesterday for the helipads item. I appreciate the board's advocacy in making those resources available to protect lives and property. However, there is a critical resource in Alpine that is being threatened. Loveland Reservoir serves as both a water drop resource as well as a natural fire break for our community, and yet the Sweetwater Authority seems intent on rendering it all but useless. The Sweetwater Authority has made known its intent that they want to lower levels of the lake to what is known as dead pool levels. This would have devastating consequences for wildlife, fire prevention, and firefighting. For reference, at full capacity, the surface area of Loveland is 400 acres. At 25% full, the surface acre is about 200 acres. Dead pooling that brings that down to a paltry 9.5 acres. I'm also asking you to utilize whatever enforcement or oversight capacity you have to get parties to abide by the agreement that was made decades ago during a 1997 easement, and that was a land swap. It identifies a shoreline fishing program to be administered from sunrise to sunset, as well as other protected activities such as bird watching and hiking. Both the Forest Service and Sweetwater Authority should abide by the terms of the agreement and ensure the easement is administered properly, which includes sunrise to sunset access. Lastly, I also bring to your attention grave concerns I have about Sweetwater Dam. There were news items back in 2016 about the poor state of that dam, and I found a CEQA analysis for work from 2018, but I can't find that any work has actually been done. It's listed as high for a hazard potential in a dam assessment. It was assessed in 2020 and rated as satisfactory, but I can't find anything that was ever assessed in 2021 or 2022. Could you please look into the status of the Sweetwater Dam? The residents of Bonita deserve that. Thank you.
Use the name Audra. So as Brian's talking about an engaged society, I find it a little bit disturbing that Nathan's behavior yesterday with the veterans and apologizing for us coming in here and having our right to free speech actually creates conflict within the community, because they came to us and said, thank you for speaking, several of them that were here. So you can't be speaking for people like that, Nathan, and what it does is it does create conflict, and that's not your job. It's not up to you to decide what's offensive to somebody, especially when they're coming to us and thanking us for speaking. And so that's why I think it's very important that people understand that as this election is coming forward, that we have a right to a secret ballot. It's enshrined in the Constitution, the Election Code, the Secretary of State's Voter Bill of Rights. It's in international treaties. It's in Federal Regulation Code. And so you go to the polling center and you get a blank piece of paper and you write who you want to be on the ballot. And you put that in the ballot box, so it has to be hand counted. We cannot use the machines anymore. They're not willing to get rid of them. So we have to bypass the machines, and it's time for we the people to take their vote back, because they're trying to usurp that just like everything else. And we can't have people like Nathan Fletcher sitting in a seat dictating what is offensive to people when they are actually telling us thank you. It may be offensive to you, but your job is to listen to your constituents, not shut them up, arrest them, keep them from speaking, voting the way you want to vote. You're supposed to vote the way your constituents want. And so that's why it's time to take it back. It's called a secret ballot. It's also known as the Australian ballot, and it's been around since the 1800s. It's time for we the people to take all of this back, because they're not going to do what they're supposed to do. As you can tell, they're all ignoring me. God bless.
I use the name Michael. Listen to this.
Thank you. We've got a motion and a second. Motion by myself, second by Supervisor Anderson. For those of you that are visiting us that are not frequent visitors here to the Board of Supervisors, please don't take to heart or be offended by some of the things you hear. There's a repeat cycle of outrage. It doesn't really matter what the topic is. It's a desire to just see how outrageous I can possibly be in an attempt to draw attention. There's a repeat cycle of outrage. It doesn't really matter what the topic is. It's a desire to just see how outrageous I can possibly be in an attempt to draw attention.
God's grace and synchronicities are beautiful, because just as God can work through evildoers and bring good out of it, evildoers can't help themselves. And that was an example of Nathan yesterday practicing the psychological abuse and triangulation that I addressed in non-agenda comments yesterday. Again, it's called DARVO. It's deny. He denies what he's doing. He attacks. then he reverses the idea of who the victim is and who the offender is. I'm not a victim of anybody because I don't play in any of these games. I want to give a great shout out to people who are for health. People like Mike Borello, who came here on September 13th, gave the board a 144-page document about all the dangerous aspects of the injections and now the bivalent injections. I also want to call out this woman called Truth who calls in all the time. This woman does some kind of research way beyond what I've done. People who are really, really informed. Sandra Martinez, she shows up a lot too and does a lot of great research. So we've got great people in this community, and it's important to keep your eye on who these people are.
Sir, are you going to, Rajesh?
Respected supervisors, my name is Dr. Rajesh Kadakia. I am a physician in San Clemente. I am a small developer. I have a request for a temporary use for an RV storage facility in Valley Center. At current situation, there is a public problem there. We are in the process with the county to submit this whole plan of an 18-acre development for RV storage. We are zoned for 24 units. As you can see, our APN number is there. We have a 35,000 square feet approved RV mini storage site there. We have 163 people on a wait list for RV struggling, and 3,300 RVs registered have no legal dump station. I leave it to your assumption as to where this waste is going. We have that 18-acre property, and we are requesting us for the supervisors to please allow a temporary permit. We are willing to bond around and meet with all the, this is how the other illegal RV storages are being used with the dump station on site going into groundwater. I defer not to show the names, but 7 of them illegally are there. We have a legal dump station, the first in Valley Center. We are willing to open it up for public use for everybody, even if they're not renting from us. This will allow all the dump to not to go into the wastewater or stormwater or flood water, which is currently happening. This would help. We build the extra EDUs. The pump has been installed. We have spent the money for the same. And Mr. Desmond, it's in your district, and we have that land. It's zoned correctly. All we are asking is for temporary respite for the customers and for a public problem to be solved by allowing a temporary use. In all honesty, we are happy to bond around it. We will do whatever the county needs. We'll meet with all the regulations. It's just the time and the emergency. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all.
Thank you. And now we will hear from those that have requested to speak by phone.
Real quickly, can I just jump in and Mr. Slovic or Sarah, could somebody meet with Dr. Rajesh and see if we can get some of these issues resolved?
We are happy to.
And my office will be happy to help. Thanks.
Thank you.
And again, we will be hearing from the first 5 callers. The remaining callers will be heard at the conclusion of today's session. When it is your turn to speak, you'll be unmuted and you will hear a recording that will tell you to begin your comments after the beep. Again, I'd like to remind the callers they should mute their TV or live video stream before they begin speaking. We'll begin with our first caller, and again, if you could please state your name before beginning your comments.
Hi, good morning, Board of Supervisors. This is KB Strange. I'm a pharmacist practicing in the unincorporated areas of the county. I'm also a member of the Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights, a nonprofit advocacy group that has been working for over 45 years to protect everyone's right to breathe non-toxic air in workplaces and public places and spaces. Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights has released several health alerts concerning marijuana smoke. One from a Dr. Matthew Springer, a cardiovascular researcher and associate professor of medicine at UC San Francisco, stated, quote, "Smoke is smoke. Both tobacco and marijuana smoke impair blood vessel function similarly. People should avoid both. and governments who are protecting people against secondhand smoke exposure should include marijuana in those rules, end quote. Just like secondhand tobacco smoke, marijuana smoke is a potent source of fine particulate matter. It can be breathed deeply into the lungs. It can cause lung irritation, asthma, and makes respiratory infections more likely. Secondhand marijuana smoke impacts cardiovascular function. It contains thousands of chemicals and at least 33 carcinogens. In short, there is no safe level of exposure to secondhand marijuana smoke. Now is not the time to bring marijuana smoking lounges to the unincorporated areas of the county. This should be a county with a robust Live Well program whose vision is to build better health, to live safely and thrive. This should be a county that supports healthy choices. Thank you for your attention this morning.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Chair Fletcher and Board of Supervisors. My name is Becky Rapp. I'm a parent and San Diego resident concerned with the uptick in drug use, drug overdose, and mental health crisis we're currently facing. Monday, an article in the Union Tribune titled, "Health Officials Remind Parents of the Dangers of Teen Marijuana Use," featured relevant local information. The article states that according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, regular use of marijuana, especially high-potency cannabis, is a risk factor for psychosis and mental health disorders such as schizophrenia, and among youth, the risk is greater. Officials with Family Health Centers of San Diego, Scripps Mercy Hospital, and the Marijuana Prevention Initiative urged parents last week to talk to their children early and often about the risks. Dr. Joe Sepulveda, Family Health Center's Chief of Psychiatry, stated, "Not all smokers get lung cancer, but it's a risk. Similarly, not everyone who uses cannabis will get psychosis, but the risk is significant." In honor of Suicide Awareness Month, I'd like to share some data from the medical examiner's office. Almost 40% of people who died of suicide under the age of 25 in 2020 tested positive for THC. The chemical was also the #1 drug found in the system of people under the age of 25 who died of suicide. These numbers can't be ignored, and as elected officials, I would suggest directing staff to provide you with factual information. Consider inviting those individuals, such as Dr. Ronit Lev, an emergency and addiction physician at Scripps Mercy Hospital, and Dr. Joe Sepulveda, Family Health Center's Chief of Psychiatry, to come and help educate you on some of the harms marijuana can have. Not giving the entire...
Thank you. Your time's up. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. My name is John Bodorf with CleanEarthForKids.org. Did you know that lead is still an aviation fuel? Jets do not use leaded fuel, but piston engine aircraft still do. These types of planes and helicopters are responsible for around 50% of airborne lead emissions in the U.S. They are the largest single source of lead pollution. Lead is a toxic heavy metal, and there is no safe level of lead exposure according to the World Health Organization, Centers for Disease Control, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. It is especially harmful to children. The top 3 lead polluters in San Diego County, according to the EPA's National Emissions Inventory, are Montgomery-Gibbs Field, Gillespie Field, and McClellan-Palomar Airport. The city of San Diego has budgeted to install unleaded avgas fuel tanks at Montgomery-Gibbs and Brown, so that leaves Gillespie and McClellan-Palomar for the county to address. The Gillespie and Palomar airports alone dump over 1,800 pounds of lead into our air every year. That is not acceptable. Unleaded avgas is now available that all general aviation aircraft can run with no modifications or risk of damage. So simply having unleaded fuel available at all San Diego County airports will drastically reduce lead emissions and protect the health of our kids. Please prioritize getting unleaded avgas at all county airports and work with all cities for their airports as well. Let's all work together to get the lead out. And please stop the use of toxic pesticides on all county lands, including leased lands, and stop leasing lands to West Coast tomato growers and Oceanside to exploit workers and use pesticides banned in countries around the world. Thank you from cleanearthforkids.org, and let's protect our kids.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Board. Kathleen Lippett here. You have and will continue to hear news about the efforts of esteemed and local medical specialists, along with parents and victims of marijuana abuse and addiction. They've been speaking publicly, sharing their experiences of trauma with the patients they continue to treat in their ERs, hospitals, and clinics with THC-related problems, both mental and physiological. These respected local physicians already have full-time jobs, but they've been willing to step into the county's vacuum of public health messaging on marijuana projects. This is not a burden that they should have to shoulder. Physicians like Drs. Ronit Lev, Dr. Joe Sepulveda, Dr. Ahmad Tadros, these are the physicians who are doing the job that our public health county officials should be doing. The silence from our top public health physicians, like Dr. Wilma Wooten, is deafening. We hope that will change soon. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Paul Hennigan. I've had a change of heart. I now favor extending the COVID emergency, not your fake emergency, the emergency for 90% of the county. You need to trash an old emergency declaration and write one that applies to the current facts. No more vax or mask mandates. No more pushing the defective, deadly vax. The reason? Sean reminded us last meeting that there are now just about as many deaths from people who were vaccinated for COVID as not. I hadn't realized that this was happening here to this extent, but here we are. In September, there were 6 deaths among the vaxxed and only 3 among the unvaxxed. From your own data, on December 1st, 2021, I told you, quote, the fragments have been found to go to the liver and can cause havoc, mainly in the form of an allergic, perhaps even septic reaction. Animal studies found that the mRNA with a phosphorescent tracer, quote, lights up the liver like a used car lot, unquote. Other studies, including in the National Institute of Health in 2012, have shown that substantial amounts of the mRNA go to other organs as well. Anyone who takes the mRNA vax gets MIS to some degree, which is an umbrella term for myocarditis, SADS, organ failure, and so on. The mRNA vax is the quick fix. This COVID mRNA disaster will be here for years to come. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. And for the remaining callers that requested to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, if you could please hang up and call back at the conclusion of the session. Chair Fletcher, that does conclude the request for non-agenda public communication this morning.
Next on our agenda is approval of the statement of proceedings minutes for the regular meeting of September 14th, 2022. I'll make a motion to approve. Is there a second? Motion
second.
By myself, second by Supervisor Anderson. Let me ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Supervisor Anderson?
Aye.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer?
Aye.
Supervisor Desmond?
Aye.
Vice Chair Vargas? Chair Fletcher?
Fletcher, aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all supervisors being present voting aye.
We'll now proceed with the formation of the consent calendar. Members of the public will have an opportunity to comment once supervisors have had the chance to move any items to discussion or make any comments they would like. We'll begin with Supervisor Anderson.
I have nothing at this time. Thank you.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Supervisor Desmond?
Nothing to pull, nothing to comment on. Make a motion for the approval of the consent calendar.
Thank you. Vice Chair Vargas.
Nothing to pull, and happy to second.
All right, let's hear from our public speakers.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We do have 5 total requests to speak on items on the consent calendar, 3 individuals in person, and 2 are requesting to speak by phone. Any members of the public that have requested to speak on items on the consent calendar, if you could please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that were provided to you. We will begin with the in-person speakers. As your name is called, if you could please come forward and stand against the east wall under the murals until it is your turn to speak. I'd like to invite forward the following individuals: Robert German, Michael Brando, and Audra. You'll have 2 minutes to address the board, and if you could please begin by stating your name for the audio record, please.
Good morning. I am asking for the chair for 3 minutes per the rules on agenda items. Nope. Okay. Then we'll move to the next paragraph. Last meeting, I talked about the realignment of San Diego's outdated aviation system. I got a slideshow. Okay. I have a slideshow to show the benefits of the Marines moving to Lindbergh on the bay. The obvious benefit is protecting our bay and critical infrastructure. The equipment the Marines use is suitable for use on the 633 acres at Lindbergh. Hovercraft, it's a slideshow, right? Yep. Riverine could support the border protection and customs force along our shoreline. Vertical takeoff and landing aircraft are the Marines' main transportation, which would work perfect for Lindbergh's small airfield even after an earthquake. We're moving along. Okay. The F-35, if not transferred to, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. The F-35 not transferred to Yuma or 29's Palms is a short runway aircraft built for airports like Lindbergh. And finally, the 3 million gallons plus of new fuel storage would dramatically increase the access to fuel for all the military installations in the bay. These tanks would be protected by the Marines. This realignment of airports was proposed in 2005, but politics got in the way. Otherwise, we would have a state-of-the-art world airport at Miramar. We would just have to add the county's transportation hub. And what makes the Marines so suitable for this is because of the first slide, which is sea level rise. That's inevitable. Are we going to look like levees and dikes to protect the airport, like New Orleans? Thank you.
I used the name Michael. Again, I like to talk about the language that's used in these agenda items, like agenda item 1 with sustainability. It says, these solutions combine to support economic health, equity, and blah, blah, blah. Again, we get back to this whole theme of hypocrisy. The board saying it's for health, and everything that it's demonstrated in other areas, which they all tie together because everything's holistic, they are not for health. They are for scratching the backs of people who are making money through them and vice versa. Just like Bryant was saying, he's educating himself on all this. That's a beautiful thing to see. Number 4, the sustainability impact statement. The state and county have made addressing climate change and sustainability 2 of the top priorities. Well, that's interesting because this board has never ever once addressed the fact that there is no organic climate change. There is climate engineering, and it's been going on for decades. I mentioned yesterday again, Dane Wigginton's site, geoengineering.org, And let's see, that's number 6. Can't talk about number 6 until it's time. Oh yeah, number 3 gets into equity again and mentions serving an underserved community. Again, it's this whole mishmash of language to confuse people and to let people have the idea these people control others, and they don't.
Username Audra. So like Michael's saying, I mean, a lot of the things that you're doing are all surrounded by the climate and like needing to do these environmental reviews and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. But your plan is to make it so that we can't drive anywhere. Like we're supposed to be walking and biking and taking public transit, and you want to build in densely populated areas in a way not where there's not transit. Instead of like taking transit to the people, you want the people to come to the transit and or work where they can do that. You're forcing us into a way of life. And I don't understand about these, how, you know, the environment has to do with the like rent adjustments. We're talking about people, you know, needing help, and there's like, this isn't a way to help people when you know, create taxes and then you're like, why are people having to lose their homes? I mean, you can't be doing that. It's like everything that you do is counterproductive to what you're saying that you're trying to do. And I mean, you want to do radar enforcement, so it's like, I mean, it's only like a 5-mile-an-hour difference. But the more you keep making it so that people don't want to drive, you're like de-incentivizing them. And that's like, I mean, are you going to be content walking, Nathan? Probably not. You don't even have an electric vehicle. You got a gas guzzler out there. So you guys aren't even like engaging in what you want us to engage in. And that's not fair. It's like, you know, rules for thee, but not for me. I mean, we know what you're doing, and it's very disturbing because it's a bigger plan. It's not, I mean, Jim, you want cars to talk to each other and have sensors and have it be like, I mean, what's with the machine? Or we can't handle things on our own? I mean, I feel like we're being pushed into something that is very dangerous. It's very dangerous, and it's a part of the World Economic Forum plan.
Thank you. We will now hear from those that requested to speak by phone. When it is your turn to speak, you'll be unmuted, and you will hear a recording that will tell you to begin your comments after the beep. I'd like to remind the callers again, they should mute their TV or live video stream before they begin speaking. And we'll go ahead and begin with our first caller.
Truth. Item 1 is the approval of the Traffic Advisory Committee's new local roadway safety plan for the county that nobody knows about or consented to. It's about getting connected cars to accept communications like radios to each other, to intersections, to lights, and even to police. On September 13th, Joel picked Justin Schlafly for the Traffic Advisory Committee. It was a calculated choice, as Justin has been deploying technology for smart cities, connected vehicles, and intelligent transportation systems. The county's new local roadway safety plan says, quote, develop an intelligent transportation system integrated into the roadway network to communicate to drivers or automated connected vehicles, end quote. Connected cars will be told of potential lane departure hazards, emergency response conditions on the road, conflict areas at intersections, conflict areas are not defined, and to reduce aggressive driving, working with law enforcement and partnerships. Partnerships are also not defined. One can imagine what will happen when your connected car decides you're driving too aggressively and it's time to let the police know. This new local roadway safety plan also includes, quote, implementing a complete streets checklist. Road safety is a public health issue, and dismantling injustices in the transportation system, end quote. Item 3, Buena Creek was drooled over on September 14th by the supervisors for its Sprinter station to be leveraged for state and federal money funnels for transit-oriented development, but their only road in and out by car has been allowed to deteriorate. Disgusting. Items 4 and 5, it wouldn't surprise me if the increased rents are reflective of the regional decarbonization framework to get rid of all of freedom of mobility in the county. No to all of them.
And thank you. And Chair Fletcher, not seeing any other callers called in, that will conclude public comment on items on the consent calendar.
All right, we have a motion by Supervisor Desmond, seconded by Vice Chair Vargas to approve the items on consent. Let me ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Supervisor Anderson.
Aye.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
Aye.
Supervisor Desmond.
Aye.
Vice Chair Vargas. And Chair Fletcher.
Fletcher, aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all supervisors being present, voting aye.
Let's go to our first agenda item, Transportation Study Guide, TSG, related to implement vehicle miles traveled, VMT. I'll turn it over to staff for their presentation.
Good morning, Chair Fletcher and members of the board. I'm Davia Lynch, Director of Planning and Development Services. Today, Mark Slovic, Jacob Armstrong, and I will be presenting on item number 6, the Transportation Study Guide to implement vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, analysis during environmental review in the unincorporated region. Today's request is for the board to adopt the Transportation Study Guide, or TSG, with the changes recommended by staff, which aligns with state guidance and establishes a threshold based on the regional VMT average, which covers the entire San Diego region, including the incorporated cities. The TSG also identifies infill areas where no VMT analysis or VMT mitigation would be required for future development projects. The TSG would streamline development in specific locations for the purposes of VMT. Although the TSG would make it more difficult and costly to develop in areas with higher VMT, it would not prevent projects from moving forward. Projects could still move forward after they've completed the necessary VMT analysis and mitigation. In the event a project cannot mitigate their VMT impacts, the project could still move forward and prepare an environmental impact report and request a statement of overriding considerations, which explains the benefits of the project that outweigh the environmental effects. Today, we will also highlight stakeholder feedback that we received during the process and additional recommendations for the board's consideration, as well as provide an update on staff's approach to conduct a parcel-by-parcel analysis. Senate Bill 743 was signed into law in 2013 and required a change to how local jurisdictions analyze transportation impacts under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Each jurisdiction was required to make that change by July 1st, 2020. The intent of Senate Bill 743 was to balance the needs of managing traffic congestion with statewide goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, encourage infill development, and improve public health through more active transportation like walking and biking. The TSG includes recommendations directed by the board on February 9, 2022, and included a phased approach to implement VMT in the unincorporated area. The first phase includes 2 parts. The first part is to prepare an updated TSG, which will be outlined in today's presentation. The second was to begin researching options for a sustainable land use framework, which would take an in-depth look to further consider how the unincorporated area should be built out, which will be presented to the board in December of this year. The second phase included the development of a VMT mitigation program in potential partnership with SANDAG or other transit agencies and local jurisdictions. It will also include an analysis of transit opportunity areas, which are areas located near existing or planned high-frequency transit, where projects would not be required to mitigate for VMT impacts. Phase 2 will require the preparation of Environmental Impact Report, or EIR. The EIR process provides flexibility and could allow future development to proceed without fully mitigating for VMT. As part of that EIR process, staff will be identifying options for the board's consideration, including whether to allow future development in transit opportunity areas without VMT mitigation or analysis, and any other category the board wants to include, and whether to require VMT mitigation or not. The Phase 2 EIR may require the board to adopt a statement of overriding considerations depending on the option selected and whether the VMT impacts have been fully mitigated. Staff will return to the board within 4 to 5 months with an update on Phase 2 and provide options for the board's consideration.
The TSG describes the process and procedure for project applicants and their consultants to use when preparing transportation analysis using VMT. The adoption of the TSG is part of the county's continued process to adopt the use of VMT as the standard to evaluate a project's transportation-related environmental impacts. The TSG would identify areas and project types that would not have to do VMT analysis or VMT mitigation and provide guidance to applicants on where development is streamlined for the purposes of VMT. The board also directed staff to include a methodology for projects to analyze roadway operations near the project site to ensure safety and consistency with the general plan, which is referred to as a local mobility analysis, or LMA. The updated TSG follows board direction and would establish a threshold based on the regional average, which includes the entire San Diego region, including the incorporated cities. The TSG would also identify infill areas where no VMT analysis or VMT mitigation would be required for future development projects. The TSG also identifies project types that are presumed to have a less than significant impact on VMT. such as small projects, projects that are considered locally serving like retail, and other criteria described later in this presentation. Under the updated TSG, projects would have a less than significant transportation impact if they are within a VMT efficient area where the project's VMT is at least 15% below the average of the whole San Diego region. This approach aligns with state guidance from the Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, for establishing a VMT threshold. The updated TSG differs from the TSG that was previously rescinded by the board, which relied on the average VMT only within the unincorporated area of the county. After receiving the board's direction in February, staff revised the TSG using the current transportation model developed by SANDAG to estimate VMT within the region. The SANDAG model is updated every 3 to 4 years to reflect existing transportation patterns in the region. The current version of the SANDAG model, referred to as Series 14, became available in March of this year. The information presented to the board in February relied on the previous SANDAG transportation model, known as Series 13. As staff developed the revised TSG, staff remapped the VMT efficient and infill areas using the Series 14 model. As a result, there are changes to the VMT efficient and infill areas that were presented in February. Areas that had the most change from the previous model presented to the board in February include Fallbrook, which went from 0 housing units to 680. The North County metro area, which went from 30 housing units to over 900 housing units, and Borrego Springs, which went from 1,000 housing units to 0 housing units. The total housing capacity within the VMT efficient areas planned under the general plan increased from 1,750 units to 2,160 units, with all the units now located in the western portion of the unincorporated county. As requested by the board, staff and our consultants developed a definition of infill based on housing density, which includes a minimum of 425 houses per square mile, a minimum of 128 intersections per square mile, and within 15 miles of job centers. These 3 criteria were used to define and map the infill areas. This analysis was based on definitions and information provided by both the U.S. Census and Department of Transportation. Development in dense areas closer to jobs leads to more diversity in land use, demand for transit and multimodal infrastructure like walking and biking, resulting in shorter vehicle trips and reducing VMT. As a result, the board directed staff to incorporate into the TSG infill areas and the surrounding villages that are close to planned transit identified in SANDAG's regional plan, excluding areas mapped as high and very high fire severity zone. The infill areas are shown in blue on this map and include North County Metro, San Dieguito, Lakeside, and the Sweetwater Springs, Spring Valley, Valle de Oro area. Projects located within these areas could move forward without VMT analysis or VMT mitigation, although other CEQA subjects like greenhouse gases, cultural resources, and biology would still need to be considered. The total housing capacity within the infill areas is 3,940 units, which is a decrease of 85 units from the previous SANDAG traffic model. When combining the VMT efficient areas with the infill areas, the total housing capacity is 5,870 homes, which is an increase of 445 units from the previous SANDAG traffic model.
The TSG also identifies the types of projects that can move forward without any VMT analysis or VMT mitigation. Per guidance from OPR, projects that generate less than 110 average daily trips, or ADT, should not have to do VMT analysis because they are considered small projects. This would allow projects that include up to 11 single-family homes or 15 multifamily homes to move forward without VMT analysis or VMT mitigation, regardless of their location. Also based on OPR, projects that are considered locally serving would not have to do VMT analysis or VMT mitigation. Local serving retail projects and public facilities closer to homes reduce how much residents drive to access these services. This includes uses like grocery stores, pharmacies, restaurants, libraries, and schools. The updated TSG would also allow projects that include 100% affordable housing to move forward without any VMT analysis or VMT mitigation based on state guidance. The TSG also identifies that affordable housing projects generate fewer vehicle trips than market rate housing based on specific data collected by staff within the unincorporated area. OPR also recommended that the county not require VMT analysis for projects located near a major transit stop or high-quality transit corridor. The Buena Creek Sprinter Station in North County near Vista is the only transit stop in the unincorporated area that qualifies as a major transit stop and high-quality transit corridor under state law. Redevelopment projects with greater VMT efficiency than the previous use do not have to do VMT analysis based on OPR guidance. An example would be an existing commercial shopping center that is proposed to be converted to residential, which could reduce the overall VMT generated from the property. The TSG provides guidance for projects that are typically not found within VMT efficient or infill locations. Farms, renewable energy projects, campgrounds, and other location-specific projects could propose a project-specific analysis or use a qualitative approach to analyze VMT. These types of projects can also qualify under other criteria like the small projects or locally serving. The board also directed, as part of a revised TSG, to continue to include a local mobility analysis, or LMA, component for discretionary projects, which would be used to evaluate road operations, traffic safety, and access issues outside of CEQA and continue to comply with the general plan requirement to address road user safety and operations. Per board direction, during phase 2, county staff will look at the phasing out of the LMA as the VMT mitigation program is being developed.
As part of the preparation of the TSG, staff held meetings with and sought input from community planning and sponsor groups, environmental stakeholders, business and industry groups, labor organizations, and non-governmental organizations. Staff also held 2 public meetings to present the updated TSG on May 24th and June 1st of this year. The TSG was circulated for public review from May 6th to June 13th of this year, and a total of 35 comments were received. Staff has prepared responses to all of the comments, which are included as an attachment to the board letter. Comments were also received with concerns over adopting a regional average when evaluating VMT within the unincorporated area and the potential impacts to housing. OPR has recommended that unincorporated jurisdictions like the County of San Diego adopt a regional average, which includes the entire San Diego region when evaluating VMT. As explained by OPR, comparing a project's VMT to that of the entire region allows a lead agency to better align with the state's climate goals. As a result, the board directed staff to align with guidance from OPR and prepare a TSG that uses a regional average, including VMT from the incorporated cities. In response to the impact to housing, the intent of the VMT legislation was to encourage infill development and reduce the time and cost for environmental review and permitting of projects located where residents will drive less. The TSG would streamline development located within VMT efficient and infill areas by not requiring any VMT analysis or VMT mitigation. Several comments raised concerns with the proposed 110 average daily trips or less standard for small projects. The concerns focused on the impact of adopting the criteria and how many potential homes could move forward without VMT analysis or VMT mitigation. The 110 ADT standard was recommended by OPR in their guidance. In this guidance, OPR did not indicate the 110 ADT should be adjusted based on the local jurisdiction's VMT or how it compares to the overall statewide average. Based on OPR's guidance, staff recommends the board adopt the 110 average daily trip standard for small projects. Concerns were also raised about the infill areas that were directed by the board, specifically that they are not within VMT efficient areas. OPR states in their VMT guidance that local agencies have discretion to adopt their own standards when evaluating VMT. SB 743 also does not require local jurisdictions to adopt a specific standard and defers to local agencies to adopt their own standards. The intent of SB 743 is to balance the need for traffic standards with the need to build housing in infill locations along with mixed-use developments in close proximity to mass transit facilities, downtowns, and town centers, and to provide greater flexibility to local jurisdictions to balance these competing needs. Many of the infill areas are within or near planned mobility hubs identified in the 2021 Sandag Regional Plan. By streamlining development in these infill locations, the county can reduce VMT and GHG emissions by increasing housing densities near existing services and planned transit. Although the existing populations in these infill areas are not high enough to support transit currently, by streamlining housing development and increasing densities, they have a higher likelihood of receiving transit in the future. Concerns were raised by stakeholders asking why high and very high fire hazard severity zones, referred to as fire zones, were removed from the infill areas because fire hazard has no effect on how far people are driving. Fire zones are identified in maps and adopted by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. The maps identify the level of fire hazard based on factors that influence the likelihood of fire, such as fire history, existing and potential fuel, weather, and predicted flame lengths. The high and very high fire zones are two of the highest hazard ratings adopted by the state. To address the concerns, staff recommends the board add the fire zones back into the infill areas and direct phased updates to the county's wildfire regulations, including updated CEQA guidelines to address concerns with projects moving forward in these areas. Under A, the staff would return to the board in 2 to 4 months with focused updates to the county's CEQA wildland fire and fire protection guidelines, last revised in 2010, after a 30-day public review to identify specific requirements within fire zones, including a requirement for a fire protection plan, and require that any exceptions to the fire code are required to be mitigated through an alternative that has the same practical effect. Under B, staff would return to the board in 12 to 14 months with a comprehensive update to the fire guidelines after a 30-day public review to update all of the requirements, including water supply, access, fuel modification, and construction standards. The comprehensive update would bring the fire guidelines up to current standards, incorporate changes to the fire code, but would not include any requirements related to evacuation. Under C, staff would return to the board in 18 to 24 months with an update to the fire guidelines to add a requirement that new development projects in fire zones provide evacuation plans using an adopted methodology that includes standards for road capacity, roadside fuel modification, and intersection controls. Staff recommends the board direct all 3 updates to the county's fire guidelines. If the board moves forward and adopts staff's recommendations, the infill areas would increase in size, adding an additional housing capacity of 1,823 housing units for a total of 7,693 housing units. Some stakeholder feedback that we received was that a parcel-by-parcel analysis should be done before adopting a TSG. We will talk more about the parcel-by-parcel analysis in a few minutes. As part of the VMT direction, housing will be streamlined in some areas like VMT efficient and infill areas, and potentially be more difficult to build in others because of time and costs associated with VMT analysis and VMT mitigation. Because VMT will likely affect where and how much future housing is built, at least until a mitigation program is in place, part of the information brought to the board in February of this year was designed to help us understand how much housing could possibly be built in the VMT efficient and infill areas, and to understand if that was enough to meet our future needs. To do that, we used a high-level model that estimated maximum future housing capacity based on the densities in the general plan, and accounting for constraints like steep slopes and floodplains, and several other factors that clearly constrain development. The model looked at gross areas to calculate housing capacity. It did not look in detail at individual parcels. It also assumed that some areas could redevelop if the value of land was greater than the value of any buildings or improvements on it. The housing model information was provided in February of this year, along with the request for board direction regarding VMT. The number that the housing model generated was a potential maximum future housing capacity of 5,870 homes in the VMT efficient and infill areas. At that hearing, questions were raised about how realistic the potential housing numbers from the model are. For example, is it likely that a homeowner will redevelop their property and build multifamily housing just because the property value is greater than the value of a single-family home? In response to those questions, staff has done additional work since February to refine the model and pull out those areas where any redevelopment may have been assumed. We ran the model again, looking only at vacant lands. What we found was that the updated number was almost the same as the original number. After removing developed properties, the reason the remaining capacity did not change significantly is because the housing model already factors in existing development. It assumed very little development land would have additional capacity, so removing developed properties did not result in a significant change to the remaining capacity. There was also a small decrease in development capacity based on changes in the Sandag model discussed earlier. Staff has also mapped the remaining housing capacity within the VMT efficient and infill areas and determined the greatest remaining capacities are located near the Buena Creek Sprinter Station in North County with approximately 1,800 housing units, which is the only high-quality transit corridor in the unincorporated area. There are also additional areas with concentrations of the remaining housing capacity in Lakeside, which has a remaining capacity of approximately 1,000 housing units, and Spring Valley, which has a remaining housing capacity of approximately 700 housing units. Recognizing that the model numbers are theoretical and high level, we also received direction from the board in February to begin to look at practical ways to facilitate actual development in VMT efficient and infill areas. Specifically, the board directed us to report back with information on how to add a parcel-by-parcel analysis and convene stakeholder groups around the issue of addressing the additional considerations that would facilitate development in VMT exempted areas at a later date. This effort would bring stakeholders, including building professionals, community members, and others, together to understand what the practical barriers and solutions are to encourage development in these areas. Examples include looking more specifically at individual parcels or collections of parcels in areas with a lot of vacant or underutilized land, and asking why more development has not occurred in those locations and what it would take to encourage that development. We anticipate that factors like a lack of infrastructure, water, sewer, and roads, and barriers to development may be barriers to development in some places. Other market and economic factors could also play a role, like needing the opportunity to build higher density housing in some areas in order for the development to make financial sense or pencil out. The earlier modeling efforts that we performed in February have now been refined and are an important first step towards this parcel-by-parcel analysis. They help us to understand at a 30,000-foot level where some of the opportunities for future development may be located and where the board could focus the parcel-by-parcel analysis. The board also directed staff to prepare options for future direction to inform the development of a sustainable land use framework for board consideration. The sustainable land use framework is a set of principles for sustainable development. It is a policy framework that guides how and where growth should occur. It can support healthy, thriving, and prosperous communities by addressing greenhouse gas emissions and helping to locate transportation, housing, and jobs closer to one another. Expanding on work done to date related to climate action, like supporting agriculture, conservation, and programs for renewable energy. And laying out a comprehensive and equitable approach to quality of life issues, including ensuring the availability of services, infrastructure, and economic development opportunities. The Sustainable Land Use Framework process, including extensive stakeholder engagement, could help to shape the future of communities throughout the unincorporated area. This process will help identify where we need to better understand the needs of different communities, both now and in the future, and guide how we can work together to tailor policies, plans, programs, and services so that they can continue to thrive. As part of the Sustainable Land Use Framework, staff will also bring back a comparison of those planning mechanisms that could be used to implement board-directed principles, including zoning overlays, specific plans, community plan updates, or a general plan update. The board directed staff to return with the reports on the sustainable land use framework and the parcel by parcel analysis within 120 days from February 9th, which was in June of this year. However, through the stakeholder process, it became apparent that additional analysis and engagement is needed on these two efforts to bring a full report back to the board. Specifically, staff received extensive input on the sustainable land use framework and what it would include. This included concepts and themes around sustainability, equity in housing, as well as specific ideas for things like regenerative agricultural programs that require additional research, analysis, and engagement before returning to the board. It also became clear that there are various approaches that could be taken with the parcel by parcel analysis, each with a different cost, timing, and other implications. For example, we could analyze every parcel in the VMT exempted areas looking for development opportunities, or we could focus on areas where vacant or underutilized land is concentrated. Most importantly, the relationship between the sustainable land use framework and the parcel by parcel analysis was reinforced. The parcel by parcel analysis looks at potentially focused areas to see how development can be facilitated in the near term, where the sustainable land use framework is a longer term look at where development should occur and how we can ensure that all communities continue to thrive, whether they are centers of future development or remain smaller and more rural. As we look at the parcel by parcel analysis and where future development could be facilitated, we will also want to understand things that could be evaluated as part of the sustainable land use framework, like how we can ensure that the communities will see more new development also receive the infrastructure, services, and quality of life amenities that will make them more equitable and sustainable. Because of the need for additional data, engagement, and bringing these two efforts together, staff will be bringing these reports back to the board toward the end of this year. On July 22, 2022, the Planning Commission considered staff's recommendation to adopt the TSG and made the following recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Return to using an unincorporated area average, VMT, when evaluating new projects instead of using a regional average. Reconsider the threshold recommended by OPR, which is 15% below the regional average, and consider only using the regional average as the threshold, or better than existing average, and not apply the 15%. Only exclude very high fire severity zones from the infill areas, and define affordable housing in the TSG as 120% area median income, or AMI. Planning and Development Services recommends the board adopt the Transportation Study Guide as proposed and recommends the board take the following actions. Find the adoption of the TSG exempt from CEQA, as well as the update on the parcel by parcel analysis and direction to update the county's fire guidelines. Adopt the revised TSG, including the changes to include the fire zones within the infill areas. Direct staff to update the county's CEQA wildfire and fire protection guidelines and other fire standards, and receive the update on the parcel by parcel analysis. This concludes staff's presentation. Planning Commissioner Douglas Barnhart is also in attendance today and will now provide a summary of the Planning Commission's recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman Fletcher and Supervisors. I'm here because of the July 22nd meeting in which we received as detailed a presentation as you just witnessed. A lot of people are trying to make this a lot more complicated than it needs to be. And it appeared to me that the July 22nd meeting was basically a carve-out of basic thresholds that were set that were deemed unworkable. And so now we're going back through trying to cherry pick where we can do development. And so that's part of my pitch to you today. VMT is not an unreasonable concept to measure transportation impacts, provided it is implemented in a fair and equitable manner. And it does need to correlate to greenhouse gas reduction goals, and the Commission does recognize the desire to create development incentives in areas where multiple transportation options exist. But even when we were using the level of service method for determining environmental impacts, the Commission required projects to incorporate retail services such as grocery stores and stuff in order to eliminate eliminate traffic. Now that we have some experience with VMT, we believe you should reevaluate 2 of the basic thresholds that were previously established. And we think that if you do that, we won't need to be going through and trying to carve out parcel by parcel and all of that sort of stuff. The first decision is to include the entire county, including downtown San Diego, to determine a VMT baseline. We believe a more equitable threshold would be to eliminate the dense urban areas from the equation. You can create more than one geographical area for the purpose of calculating baseline VMTs while maintaining your preference for infill projects served by multiple transportation options. If you do not make this change, we are told that economics will dictate no development in the county, as any proposed mitigation fee will only add cost to what is already considered the highest housing cost in the nation. Using downtown San Diego to establish a VMT baseline for areas like Lakeside, Ramona, and Fallbrook is fundamentally flawed and will not allow a viable pathway to approval for these communities. San Diego County, if you remember, is larger than the states of Delaware and Rhode Island. It's about the size of the state of Connecticut. A one-size-fits-all approach will not work with this diverse county. The Commission also feels that a 15% reduction target is too strong. I am told by staff that Riverside County has not adopted a reduction target for its southern area. Hence, economic activity in southern Riverside County is strong, as I've personally witnessed since I happen to be a landholder in southern Riverside County. Greenhouse gas emissions do not recognize county boundaries, so one must question why we are forcing purchasers of new residents to buy in the Temecula-Murrieta areas and make the long commute to San Diego. The county greenhouse gas reduction target for 2020 was met from everything I've read. I think we were 4% under it. If that is accurate, the 15% VMT target should be reduced. You have that wiggle room. More importantly, this commission that's appointed by you, all 5 of you, had a 6-to-1 vote recommended that you review the 15% and the countywide VMT target. I have read that housing inventory in the county is 2.5 months for single-family homes and 1.9 months for attached homes. I'm also told that you should have a 4 to 6 month inventory to create a balanced seller-buyer market. To say we need housing units is to state the obvious. Part of the affordable issue in this county is related to supply and demand. Experience tells me, from my years on the Planning Commission, that there are usually 3 objections to new projects. We hear them over and over and over. Increased traffic, fire safety, which is related to congested roads used for exit routes, and community character alteration. Current traffic mitigation costs paid by a Pacific project go to Pacific general funds and are never really directed back to the surrounding community that absorbed the development. The result of that, in my experience, is the neighborhood where we site these developments never see any improvements. It's all downside for them because any mitigation fee is used somewhere else. I would recommend that you review that so that when you approve of the project in an area, the citizens of that area see some immediate improvement for the money that's paid. And I think if you do that, you'll have a lot less not in my backyard comments. You appoint the planning commissioner, so it's logical that you should trust the collective wisdom of those you appoint. A 6-to-1 vote. We are not staff. I'm not here to implement what you want to do. I'm here to tell you what we actually think based on what our knowledge is. I would hope these comments give you pause and you reconsider and modify your previous threshold projections. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from the rest of our public speakers.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We have 40 total requests to speak, 24 individuals in person and 16 requesting to speak by phone. I'd also like to note for the record that we did receive 22 e-comments on this item, all in opposition. Any members of the public that have requested to speak on this item by phone, if you could please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that were provided to you. We will begin with the in-person speakers. Those in favor, as your name is called, please come forward and stand against the east wall under the murals until it is your turn to speak. And I will be calling individuals in groups of 5. I would like to invite forward the following individuals: Jorge, Clifton, Dana Goodman, Chris, I believe it's Darling, and Kelly Batten. You have 2 minutes to address the board, and if you could please begin by stating your name for the record.
Sure. Board of Food Supervisors, good morning. How are you? Jorge Viramontes, representative with the Local 619 Carpenters Union here in San Diego. As a longtime resident of Ramona, I had the opportunity to buy an affordable home and watch a true village grow. And if you guys are familiar with Ramona, you know our town is growing. Now is not the time to be limiting options for available land stock development near large housing communities that have developed its own economic ecosystem. Removing areas from infill opportunity will limit the chance for commercial development and stifle the growth opportunity for emerging communities. Thank you.
Good morning, Supervisors. My name is Cliff Williams. I'm a land use analyst with the law firm of Latham Watkins. I'm sorry, Supervisor Lawson-Remer, also too, you're not going to have this presentation in front of you, and I brought it on a thumb drive, and but we're relying on paper.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Oh, super. My name is Cliff Williams again. I'm here with the Green Hills Ranch project, which is in the Lakeside area. We're asking you to support staff's recommendation to approve the transportation study guide with the modifications in attachment C to your staff report, which remove the fire hazard areas as criteria for the infill development. The counties, you have arena. It's been reduced quite a bit, but you still do need to produce units in the county. The best place to produce those units is in the infill areas because it's the most efficient for growth, and it requires fewer services and infrastructure in those infill areas. And it will actually create VMT efficient areas, like your staff said. One of the CAPCOA mitigation measures on a planning level is actually to densify infill areas. So you're actually doing what CAPCOA is telling you to do for VMT efficiency. One of the things that I just wanted to point out is that there aren't a lot of these infill areas throughout the county. And if you look at the maps that I gave you, and these come from Farron Piers, the first map for each area shows where the full infill area is and where if you were to take out the fire areas. Our project, the Green Hills Ranch area in the red there, they actually have set aside about 70% of their land for open space, which actually creates a lot of vegetation, which then creates the fire maps in that area because the vegetation maps are tied to those fire areas. Whereas the objective criteria for infill is based upon where housing is, where jobs are, where shopping is, and all of that sort of thing. So it makes sense, and we're in that infill area. So we'd ask you that you actually support these things, and I just want to emphasize too that fire is a criteria that is already looked at in CEQA, so you're already going to get that review. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll hear from the next speaker.
Good morning, Supervisors. Excuse my voice. Hello, my name is Dana Goodman. My brother and I are owners of Green Hills Ranch project, which is a 63-unit tentative map in Lakeside. I would like to express my support for the revisions of TSG found in attachment C to the staff report that removes a fire hazard as a criteria for infill development. As you saw in the handout that Cliff gave you, our project is completely surrounded by other homes and is very close to jobs and shopping areas and is clearly within the infill area. My brother and I began processing the project with the county in 2009. Yes, 2009. Each time that it seemed like we were close to finishing, a rule would change or a new regulation would be put in place, or we would be asked to complete yet another technical report or update, sometimes for a second, third, and fourth time, a previous technical report. Recently, our mitigated negative declaration was complete, and we were heading towards a hearing when we were told we would need to complete a VMT analysis. We were happy to comply, as we always do, but we were again slowed by the development of the Transportation Study Guide. We were confident that we could overcome the VMT hurdles because we were in an infill area. But when fire hazard was blended and coupled with the infill criteria, it suddenly changed our VMT status, even though other projects down the street were considered infill and therefore VMT efficient. It created significant and unmitigated impact that would have put us into an unnecessary EIR process at great expense and additional time. Our mitigative negative declaration has already analyzed fire hazard, and we believe that the design of our project has fully mitigated the fire risk, and we look forward to bringing the project for your review. We believe that our project is in the right place because it is already urbanized location.
Thank you. We'll hear from the next speaker. Thank you. And as the next speaker is approaching the podium, I'd like to invite the remaining speakers in favor: Christina Marquez, Jesse Garcia, and Jim Whalen. And my understanding is Kelly Batten is actually in opposition, so we'll be calling you next.
Good morning, Supervisors. My name is Chris Darling, and I spent the last 42 years of my life and the last 34 in San Diego in the land development business and as a home builder. I support the current staff recommendation to approve the Transportation Study Guide and to remove the fire hazard criteria for infill development. I've been working closely with the Goodman family for the last 3 years to kind of get this project, the Green Hills Ranch 2 project, over the hump. The project was first submitted to the county, as Dana said, 2009, and was deemed complete with the CEQA document nearing completion when the project was shut down in February of 2022. Prior to that, I entitled a 20-lot project, literally a quarter of a mile away from this project, and it was approved in 2015, called Riker Ranch. The property was also in the same very high fire severity zone, but was approved, and subsequently it was built out, and now we've got homeowners living in those houses. Directly north of Riker Ranch, once again, even closer to the Goodman property, is the Ronnie Swain project, which is currently being graded and infrastructure being installed. This project was approved and allowed to move forward, even though it was in the very high fire severity zone. And directly west of Riker Ranch is the Clegg property, which at last report was an approved 13-lot project. This project, I'm not sure where it stands in the process right now, but it's also located in the same very high fire severity zone. So we'd like to have you folks recognize that we're in an infill area and for the project to be able to move forward. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Batten, and I am here representing the San Diego Building Industry Association. The BIA continues to express our serious concerns over the implementation of a regional VMT threshold and its negative impact on meaningful housing production in the unincorporated area. In fact, the regional VMT calculation makes it impossible to build affordable homes for middle-income families due to the exorbitant compliance costs and lack of mitigation options. This strategy also makes it virtually impossible for the county to comply with the state's housing element requirements. The county's analysis found that over 90% of VMT-efficient lands are built out and has yet to determine what specific areas are capable for realistic development. The county will be unable to meet its regional housing needs allocation as over 60% of possible transportation demand management programs in Appendix G of the Transportation Study Guide have been ruled out. Areas outside VMT and infill areas are financially infeasible and with limited mitigation options and massive per unit fees based on the county's mitigation fee analysis conducted in 2021. The county's analysis showed that added costs ranging from $100,000 to $900,000 per unit. The housing is already unaffordable, and we are trying to build homes for our first responders, teachers, military families to create generational wealth for communities of color, but the additional fees make it impossible to build homes for those families. These fees, coupled with the lack of tangible mitigation options, will render vast areas economically infeasible. We appreciate the open communication with staff and the opportunity to comment on the Transportation Study Guide. We look forward to collaboratively working to provide homes for all San Diegans.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Board of Supervisors, James Whalen, J1 Associates. I use the name Jim. I'm going to talk high level and then one little example. Our staff has really worked hard on this, and I think it's still obvious that more needs to be done for the unincorporated communities. They're not doing well as a result of this. What's proposed isn't healthy for Ramona and Alpine and Valley Center and the communities that are there now and need to have a continued growth and development. Nobody wants them to go away. I know that. So instead, I'm going to recommend to support what the Planning Commission said. Commissioner Barnhart nailed it. I couldn't do better than he did. I know it's probably a Pyrrhic victory if we get it, but I would love to see electric cars be used as mitigation in VMT areas and rural areas. The law doesn't allow it, but I would push that we would change that. And then to be specific, supporting a VMT exemption for infill areas in unincorporated communities. We're working in one in Alpine, where the idea is to take all the development off of the property that's in the outskirts of the town and send it into the town. This is a transfer development rights program. It won't work if we have this thrown in the way. So just to quickly summarize, I support the Planning Commission position. I urge you to take a second look at what we can do for the unincorporated communities that are not VMT efficient in today's rubric and move forward with some of the more progressive actions you've undertaken, such as the TDR efforts in Alpine and so on. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair, County Board of Supervisors. My name is Jesse Garcia. I'm with the Carpenters. Before I read this, I just want to say thank you for your leadership here in this room when everyone's looking, and especially out in the community when no one's looking. Thank you. The Carpenters support staff recommendations to include all areas possible into the infill areas. This is to support not only expanding opportunities to create commercial opportunities to growing communities that allow residents to work closer to home. The TSG is only the first step in this process, and the Carpenters look forward to working with you all and staff to create a robust mitigation menu and further the growth of our community. I want to thank the staff, too, for all their hard work. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And as the next speaker is coming up, I'll call the first 5 speakers in opposition: Erica Wolski, Consuelo, Michael Brando, Oliver Twist, and Chuck's, I think it's Salmon. If you could please line up under the murals. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, Board. Christina Marquez speaking on behalf of IBW 569 and our 3,600 electricians and power professionals in San Diego and Imperial counties. Again, speaking, using the same comments basically from the Planning Commission, transportation pollution is threatening our climate and our health, especially in many low-income communities of color. Now is the time to take bold action to create cleaner air and slash climate emissions. SB 743 supports California's broader climate goals by ensuring analysis and mitigation of environmental impacts under CEQA and will aid in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, the state's largest source of climate pollution. Reducing VMT in selected areas, providing alternatives to driving primarily in various forms of transit, building more in infill areas near transportation hubs, and those proposed in the Sandag 5 Big Moves are the options of most importance. Thank you to staff for all of your hard work. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Good morning. So my name is Erica Wolski, and I'm the General Manager of Ramona Municipal Water District. We provide water, wastewater, and park services to the community of Ramona. We did provide a detailed comment letter regarding this agenda item with specifics on how we anticipate this proposal to affect our services. As a district, we are not anticipating a lot of growth or very large developments. For example, LAFCO estimated that over the last 10 years, we only added 54 units per year. However, we are estimating that if the county adopts the TSG as proposed, growth will be significantly reduced, and it is estimated to reduce the district's revenue by approximately $1 million per year. We do have 3 disadvantaged census tracts in our district, which encompass our downtown area, also known as the Ramona Village or infill area. These are our most vulnerable residents, and along with the rest of our community, lack access to transit. Ramona has very limited bus service, but we are excited about being a rural mobility hub and the opportunities that that could provide us. We are asking the county to consider the addition of rural mobility hubs to the criteria for finding infill to be VMT exempt. In order to better serve our customers, we are specifically asking the county to consider our Ramona Village area to be exempt from VMT. So without a VMT exempt area, developers will be more likely to build larger homes at the edges of our district where VMT costs can be recovered through higher home prices, which encourages development that we are in areas we're looking to preserve as agricultural land or open space. We need the county to help encourage infill development in Ramona, where we have existing utility infrastructure, where pedestrian and bicycle-friendly improvements have been made both by Caltrans and the county, and where VMT is lower, and away from the extremities of our system. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yes, my name is Chuck Salmon, operating engineers, Local 12, general contractor, small-time developer. I urge you to look into this VMT very deeply, although what the commission has chosen to do on their solution to this is going to create a lot of gray areas and problems for small-time development. The state of California, obviously, we all know we're in a housing crisis, and this will smash small development for the property owners. I urge you to take a deep look into this and reconsider the project. Thank you.
Good morning, Oliver Twist here. First of all, I am in strong opposition to implementing the Transportation Study Guide and the vehicle miles traveled analysis. First, absolutely not. Do not return fire zones to this plan. I came this close to losing my house in the Cedar fire. My friend lost his house in the Viejas fire. He told me, Mary, I knew I wasn't running fast enough when my hair caught on fire. That's a reality for people living in these high-severity fire zones. Next, the state guidelines around VMT are nebulous. They fail to consider the use of electric vehicles as well as the rise of residents working from home. Under the state guidelines, a resident who worked from home and only drove an electric vehicle would still be considered as producing the same amount of emissions as someone who commutes downtown every single day in a gas vehicle, unless you could provide substantial or burdensome evidence to the state. And the general plan already has reduced vehicle miles traveled by an estimated 11% in 2011. Instead, here are some suggestions to consider. Include areas designated as village to be exempt from VMT. The village areas alone have a capacity of 22,000 or so and were planned to accommodate growth. 2, analyze the semi-rural lands within the county for use as middle-income housing. Third, lead from an effort to form the regional housing partnership. You have the resources, land, and leadership to bring all the region together. This item flies in the face of wanting to solve the regional housing and affordability crisis. Do not implement yet another blanket policy that hurts rather than helps. You constantly lament the lack of affordable housing, and this only exacerbates that problem. The item is your moment to show who you are and what the board truly values. Please prioritize affordable housing over blanket restrictions for the entire county. Thank you.
I use the name Michael. That gentleman in the red that just spoke, you know, he asked you to look into this. That's not going to happen. These people aren't going to look into this. Mary, you know better too. They're not going to look into this. This is all tied into the global agenda. Why do we come here and play like that's not what's going on? It's just, it's absolute madness. Don't interrupt me, Nathan. You can giggle all you want, but listen to this too. It's related to this.
It's not about any of that. So we create these little sideshow arguments. It's about the World Economic Forum. Give me a break. That's a meeting, not a movement. Do that. I went to a meeting. It's not about any of that. So we create these little sideshow arguments. It's about the World Economic Forum. Give me a break. That's a meeting, not a movement.
Such a lie. It's not, yeah, it's a meeting, but it's also a movement. And you people, whether you consciously know it or not, are involved in this whole triangulation thing of trying to control everybody. This VMT, you know, it keeps talking about the unincorporated areas, but all of this is a slow creep into all aspects of society. We just recognize that VMT can be tracked by smartphones, GPS, and streetlight data. Again, it's this attempt to try to control everybody. And this is doomed to failure. This may go over your head right now, but you may remember this man that came to the podium and mentioned this. I'd recommend you read The Psychology of Totalitarianism, The Psychology of Totalitarianism by Mattia Desmond. He goes into this whole artificial reality of trying to use computers to control everything and everybody, and it's doomed to failure. And that's what's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, it's inevitable.
Thank you. And as the next speaker is coming up, I'll call the next 5 speakers: Benjamin Wilson, Elizabeth Edwards, Heather Riley, Audra, and Larry Walsh.
I am Consuelo. Control, control, control. Limit people's travel. Welcome to a China-ca. Do you see what they're doing? You are in fact allowing government to entirely rule over and control every aspect of your lives, and they're trying to normalize it all. Reminder, they move towards their goal bit by bit, then all of a sudden we have arrived at a place that we would have never normally have agreed to be at if they had been transparent and forthcoming from the start. But instead, society will be left wondering how the hell it even got here, where government has full control, a place where you will have to ask government permission to poo even. Heads up, society is not paying attention. All of this is happening in plain sight. I urge you to please start paying attention, close attention, get involved. It's dire. These are the days when your children and grandchildren will look back and ask you, what did you do to stand for us? Did you stand up to their tyranny, or did you go along with it? Life is possible without big government. We've sold our freedom for their false security and bullshit concept of progress. If you continue to stay idle and allow government to do whatever they please, your loved ones in the future and the future generations will suffer greatly. The time is now to get involved. To the ones already practicing civil disobedience and starting up their own systems free from big government, I say to you, don't stop. Your efforts are not in vain. Keep blazing those trails, for the rest will eventually wake up and follow, and they'll wake up to the tyranny.
Your outburst in the 4th row are violating the rules of procedure and disrupting the conduct of the meeting. It's your first warning.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. I'm going to read this just because of time. I'm going to list a couple facts.
Could you please state your name for the audio record?
That's right. My name is Ben Wise, and I'm a home builder. The city issued permits for 5,033 homes last year. This is short of the 13,505 the city needs to build each year to meet the regional housing needs assessment from the state. That's from the Voice of San Diego newspaper, July 13, 2022. Guys, I'll tell you what we already know. We're in a housing crisis, but not just a housing crisis, a housing shortage crisis. Apple announced an increase to 5,000 jobs this year. Undergraduate applications at San Diego State is the highest ever at 106,000. My alma mater of UCSD is at 131,000 applications this year and going toward 50,000 enrollments. But they had to cut out 9,000 enrollments this year just to build more housing. When these techs move out here and students graduate, UCSD's problems will be our problems and their housing. How this relates to the VMT? Well, with the original proposed VMT bill, we are allowed up to 16.9 miles without mitigation. One of the developments I'm working on is the center of Alpine. It's 14.84 miles outside of that range. The mitigation fee of $1,400 per mile puts my costs at no exaggeration of $54,000 per lot. I have a 26 parcel lot, so without exaggeration, my fees become $1,404,000 for a 26 parcel project. This fee is 100 times larger than any other permitting or development fee we have. You guys are building a 2-acre park on Wright Field in Alpine, 2 minutes from my property. This will attract families, but if there's no homes to live, it's kind of pointless. With the local land overdeveloped, much of the land for development is in unincorporated San Diego. By nature, these are farther from the city center and therefore have huge, huge VMT fees. These VMT fees equal low margins and ridiculously high fees and will stall development in San Diego even further than we already are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Edwards. First off, supervisors, I'd like to thank you for a qualitative approach for agriculture. I certainly know that my winery attracts people who visit additional nearby wineries along with other backcountry destinations. My only concern with the qualitative approach is very subjective. Another concern is that wineries are still listed as employers, which is not exempt. This discourages beginning farmers through onerous costs for the professional services needed to satisfy this requirement. And now that the fire areas are added back in, our roads are not adequate to handle that. And it's not our fault. It is the fault of those making our zoning plans and transportation plans. These three issues will keep backcountry development projects navigating on a more costly, uncertain, and case-by-case basis. There is more work to do on this. So I urge you to hold off on finalizing this version until it fairly represents all people within our county, as the commissioners suggested too. In addition, the VMT inefficient community ranking will hurt my entire town. The backcountry induces travel to our recreational areas, and now hiking is a huge draw, especially to the eastern half of the county, which is without convenient or safe access. Our highways and services need to be improved. We don't have 2 lanes in most of the heavily accessed recreational areas, nor do we have EV charging ports, 6 in Ramona, or hospitals. Don't rush and fall short on serving people fairly. Most people buy homes in the backcountry because they can't afford the prices in the city. Please pause to rethink this.
Good morning, Larry Walsh, Walsh Engineering and Surveying. I represent builders and landowners in the backcountry. Please approve these VMT guidelines this morning with the Planning Commission's recommendations. If we don't, we're going to crush the American dream for a lot of people that want to live in the backcountry and by creating essentially a moratorium. You could say our job is to help county residents with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's not shy away from that responsibility and take the easy way out by avoiding the Planning Commission's recommendations just to avoid litigation. Thank you.
Good morning, supervisors. My name is Heather Riley. I'm with Alan Matkins, and I'm here today on behalf of my clients, CR Quest Haven, who are applicants for a pending Quest Haven project. You all received a letter from me on Friday with our concerns about the TSG. I submitted an opposition slip today, but that's not entirely accurate. There really isn't a neutral slip that's offered. We support staff's current position, but not entirely and not fully. The recommendation to delete the fire severity maps from the analysis is absolutely necessary. It is the correct first step. Since the record available to date is completely devoid of any substantial evidence to support a connection between VMT and wildfire, it makes sense to decouple those efforts, and we thank staff for that recommendation. We do ask, if the board elects to take one of the options staff has presented, that you do choose option A, but we also ask that pending projects be grandfathered in. We have now been in a turnaround on VMT for nearly a year, and we don't want to end up in a turnaround on wildfire when CEQA adequately addresses wildfire. We also ask the analysis supporting infill areas be reconsidered. As explained in my letter and outlined in the attachment from our transportation experts, CR Associates, the calculations have resulted in some errors, particularly with regard to the Quest Haven site. Our site qualifies as an infill area once we remove the fire issue, but the analysis does not match. We are confident we can deliver 76 new homes, 7 of which will be set aside for low-income households in an urban neighborhood right next to San Marcos and Carlsbad, which will further the county's housing goals, minimize GHG emissions, reduce VMT. Thank you for your time.
And as the next speaker's coming up, I'll call the final in-person speakers: David Lloyd, Steve Powell, Jonas Dyer, Lauren Schultz, Brandon Powell, and Robert Krysak.
I use the name Audra. So I guess I don't know when the people consented to them being tracked through their data in their cell phones or street lights or GPS. There's also cameras that are being put up to watch people go in and out of communities. And that's not something the people consented to. I don't think they understand how dangerous that is, because that uses things like, that goes into the social credit score and using things against us, because you're saying that you're calculating it by determining the distance and number of vehicle trips generated from a home or business. That means you're tracking the people to do this. And we already know that our cell phones track us, that we have AI profiles that we feed just with our biometrics and everything that we do. I mean, Facebook was used to track information on people. And that leads down a dangerous path, because it's like, you're also incentivizing people and decentivizing them. That doesn't seem equitable to me. Because you're like, oh, if you want to live out in an unincorporated area, there's many reasons why people do. Some people want to farm, they want to have land, they want to be away from the city. And so it's like everything you're doing, you're pushing people into a way of life that is not equitable. It's not. And you talk about equitable, like all the words that you guys use are totally, like I said, contradictory to what you actually want to do. And I don't think people understand that they're being tracked like this just in order to do this. But it seems like by using all of these tactics, it keeps you from actually building the land or the housing that you need. Instead of just, it's like you set up all these roadblocks for yourselves to like jump over, which in turn keeps you from meeting your quota. And you guys are always at a shortfall. So it doesn't make sense. And I don't think you should be tracking people. I do not consent to that. And I bet you most of the people don't.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is David Lloyd, and I'm an associate with the law firm Best and Krieger. And I'm appearing today on behalf of Valley Center Municipal Water District. The district is more than frustrated with the proposal before the board because it fails to recognize or take into consideration the financial, economic, and social impact the TSG and VMT program will have on the district. Planning for public infrastructure, as the board is well aware, takes time. Based on land use densities approved by the county some time ago, the district has incurred public debt and expended public funds in order to plan for, design, and ultimately construct public infrastructure to serve the needs of those densities. For example, to support the approved densities in the North and South Village areas of Valley Center, these efforts included expanding the treatment capacity of the Woods Valley Ranch Water Reclamation Facility from 75,000 gallons per day to 275,000 gallons per day, as well as the development of a 16 million gallon seasonal storage facility and collection system to connect properties in both village areas to the treatment plant. The district can't just undo the substantial infrastructure investments it has made in reliance on the county's zoning actions. Because the proposed TSG does not recognize the north and south villages as areas exempt from VMT analysis or mitigation, it will very likely result in developments within those areas not moving forward due to increased mitigation costs to their projects. This puts in real jeopardy the revenue stream to be used to pay for the infrastructure constructed by the district. And the proposed TSG would all but eliminate the prospects of development in the villages. The district would also like to acknowledge the op-ed written by Supervisor Anderson, published in the Times of San Diego last weekend, and restate his findings that the proposed VMT guidelines would functionally reduce the unincorporated area's housing capacity by over 90%, threatening nearly 23,000 potential units in county village areas alone. In light of this, we would respectfully request that the board approve modifications to the proposed TSG to either include the areas designated as villages to be exempt from VMT, or specifically designate the Valley Center North and South villages as areas within which no VMT analysis or mitigation would be required. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
No one needs your help or comments when it's not your turn to speak. First warning. Next speaker, please.
Good morning, Chair and Supervisor. My name is Steve Powell, Ramona resident and employer. I have 3 comments. First is the question, why was Ramona removed from the infill screening criteria for VMT? County staff provided analysis and substantial evidence showing Ramona met the criteria to be classified as an infill area where projects would not be considered to have VMT impacts. CEQA is about facts, it's about nexus and substantial evidence. What was the substantial evidence to remove Ramona as an infill area while contradicting the county's own analysis related to the nexus between infill and VMT? As noted, the only area in the entire unincorporated county that is screened from VMT based on criteria related to transit is the Buena Creek Sprinter Station. All other transit is potential future scenarios that can't be used for CEQA analysis or thresholds because CEQA must be analyzed from an existing conditions baseline to determine project impacts. Secondly, through grant funding and years of hard work and ongoing updates, Ramona and other unincorporated areas of the county have adopted the pedestrian-friendly and live-work concept by encouraging infill development in our downtown areas through the adoption and implementation of the form-based code zoning. This program has not only been encouraged by planning and environmental groups alike, but it has also reduced urban sprawl and encouraged development within the village core. It is a process, but one that is working. We are also beginning to see newly proposed mixed-use projects that provide housing and services to local residents. Assigning additional restrictions to projects that exceed certain thresholds is not the answer. Amortizing costs on smaller projects is not feasible. Lastly, I've lived in Ramona for almost 25 years. My kids went to school here. My office is located in the heart of downtown Ramona. All of our employees also live and are raising their families in Ramona. One of the most difficult challenges we face is providing quality housing to support and attract our employment base. Ironically, some of the impacts created by the VMT proposal itself fosters increased carbon emissions. It says a lot when people consider commuting from Riverside County to San Diego because housing options don't exist.
Thank you. Next speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Lauren Schulte, and I am from Ramona. VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, is not something we are unfamiliar with. However, the County of San Diego is focusing their efforts on asking community members to utilize walking, biking, and public transit in a city that spans 4,300 square miles and is comparable in size to that of Connecticut. Ramona is no exception. Our 84,000-acre boundary, the majority of our 84,000-acre boundary, the majority of our population encapsulates a smaller footprint with the greatest density and employment base centered in our village core. Downtown Ramona is eligible to meet the newly proposed VMT efficient area. The importance of capitalizing on it is pertinent. County staff and the volunteer efforts of many Ramona residents finalized the form-based code in 2014. A major goal of the form-based code was to curb urban sprawl within the backcountry and focus efforts within the town center of the village core. Market rate projects meeting or exceeding the definition of the form-based code remain challenged with exorbitant review times, studies, and fees. Penalizing the village core with additional VMT development fees coupled with the increased cost of living, labor, material, and lack of workforce will render most projects infeasible and against the core intent of the FBC. Moreover, the encouragement of affordable housing funded by government contracts and prevailing wages check every single box against the intent of the proposed TSG, and yet it is considered exempt. More and more of my colleagues, friends, family, and acquaintances are moving out of San Diego County while still working within the county limits, often commuting for hours each day, thus increasing emissions simply to achieve a home ownership. Unfortunately, housing that is affordable does not equate to affordable housing in terms of attainability. Based on the guidelines illustrated by the county, infill, transit priority areas, and locally serving project are what's going to solve the SB 743 intent. However, the family that favors a backyard over a balcony is forced to find elsewhere to call home due to the lack of all things the intent embodies.
Thank you. And final call for Robert Krysak. And I'd also like to note for the record that we had 2 individuals register their opposition but not wish to address the board. And with that, we will now hear from those that have requested to speak by phone. When it is your turn to speak, you'll be unmuted and hear a recording that will tell you to begin your comments after the beep. I'd like to remind the callers they should mute their TV or live video stream before they begin speaking, and we will go ahead and begin with our first caller.
Good morning. This is Robin Joy Maxson, and I am the chair of the Ramona Community Planning Group. Unincorporated and rural communities rely on good governance of the entire San Diego County Board of Supervisors. Rural communities rely on the inclusive and fair application of policy changes impacting our county residents and visitors. In the unincorporated communities, there's a lack of transportation options. Yet in the town of Ramona, we have significant employment centers located between 5 to 15 miles from our town. And although this situation has existed for many years, there has been no change in the methods to residents commuting to work. Solutions such as riding your bike to work are not only impractical and dangerous on our rural highways, but would be a one-way trip for most of our folks living in the foothills and mountains. The elevation change between Ramona and the nearest job center is 2,000 feet or more, higher as you move east. Through no fault of their own, rural residents find themselves living in county-labeled VMT inefficient areas, also known as the bad column. Instead of stigmatizing our communities with a label of VMT inefficient community and implementing restrictions and penalties for living and building in these areas, let's instead work to support the rural community. Instead of a VMT inefficient label, let's label our town as the county treasure it truly is, providing locally sourced food, bringing tourist dollars to the region with winery tours, hiking, equestrian events, and youth sports tournaments. And the crown jewel of our town, several thousands of acres dedicated to preserving unique and protected habitat for vulnerable flora and fauna. Actions the county can take to work with its unincorporated rural communities are to label our towns a transit opportunity area instead of a VMT inefficient area, to reinstate the trolley line plan for our area, thereby reducing the need for commutes and reducing VMT. Don't penalize our towns and citizens. Work with us to create a healthy, vital future for all county residents. I thank you for your service.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Sanchez, and I'm a traffic engineer at CR Associates. I'm here today to make a request on behalf of a development project currently in process in the county known as West Haven Project, to be considered as an infill area project. This is a site-specific development in the San Diego Community Plan area that is fully consistent with the general plan and the community plan. The project's location, immediately adjacent to San Marcos, provides access to grocery stores and other services such as restaurants and other retail opportunities. The County of San Diego Infill Areas Memorandum states that in order to consider a site as infill development, it must meet all 3 of the following criteria: housing, transportation, and employment. The criteria and analysis in this memorandum did not consider the West Haven site to be infill, as it did not meet the thresholds of the criteria previously mentioned. My firm, CR Associates, conducted an analysis attached as Exhibit A to the board letter using the criteria described in the county's memorandum, and it met the infill criteria as follows. Housing density was identified to be approximately 1,979 housing units per square mile, where the threshold is identified as 385. Intersection density was identified as 133 intersections per square mile, where the threshold is 128. Access to employment was identified as having an accessibility ratio of 13.87, where the threshold is 12.73. The discrepancies in the findings between the county analysis and CR Associates analysis were believed to be that rather than using the actual project site as the centroid for the analysis, the county methodology utilized the centroid of the TAZ. By doing this, the housing and intersection density criteria are not met because the capture area originating at the centroid of the TAZ mostly encompasses open space areas. Because of the findings in CR Associates analysis, the West Haven site should be considered as an infill area. Thank you to staff for all your hard work. I will be happy to work and coordinate with you to discuss the details of the analysis and why West Haven should be considered as an infill area. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Hello, my name is Carl Aldinger, and I'm speaking today on behalf of Sierra Club San Diego. We have studied this issue carefully and do not support the county staff's proposed policy. We believe the Board of Supervisors should not adopt Transportation Study Guide's vehicle miles traveled regulations as proposed by county staff. The county should not adopt Appendix C and Appendix E, specifically the 4 separate VMT exemption categories and maps detailed on draft pages 69, 70, 71, and 72, and all of Appendix E. Instead, the county should use the one unified Sandag map shown on draft page 127 to show VMT efficient properties. The county should not adopt any TDM exemption measures as outlined in the draft guidelines and Appendix G. The county should not adopt Appendix D, infill allowances for VMT exemption. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. My name is Justin Splafley. I am a California licensed civil engineer and traffic engineer. I'm also president of Urban Systems Associates. I want to start by saying that staff has done a tremendous amount of work pulling together the Transportation Study Guide, and they should be applauded for all their hard work over the last year or two. However, I did want to express some concern inherent in the nature of this switch to a VMT standard for transportation under CEQA. As you know, this is an area that is generating significant discussion and a significant amount of research. For example, between the time the TSG was rescinded and the time the new TSG has been prepared, the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, known as CAPCOA, presented a new version of their handbook, which spells out research regarding VMT reduction measures. With that update, a lot of research and a lot of guidelines are also being updated, and research continues and will be updated in the future. So this research into VMT reduction measures continues. In addition, research into trip generation continues, and standards are regularly updated. I urge the board to reinforce that the TSG should be interpreted with flexibility towards implementing new recommendations and incorporating the latest information as VMT reduction measures continue to expand and research is updated. In addition, as additional research is conducted related to unique uses or areas, these factors should be considered when applying the guidelines. An example would be a project which can demonstrate and has unique trip generation characteristics and therefore falls under the 110 ADP threshold. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Hello, my name is Karina Contreras, and I am speaking in my capacity as Transportation Policy Advocate for Climate Action Campaign. As the climate crisis worsens, more of San Diego County will be considered high to very high fire risk. Land use patterns cannot continue in a business-as-usual manner if we are to keep our communities safe from extreme weather and air pollution. Proper SB 743 implementation is crucial to achieving our regional climate goals and keeping our region safe for generations to come. The climate and housing crises demand that the county adopt a transportation study guide that reduces greenhouse gas emissions by stopping sprawl and building more equitable communities directly connected to housing, jobs, and transit. Reducing future VMT growth means building housing and employment opportunities that are connected to various methods of mobility located within walking or biking distance to public transportation services. But this is is not what is being proposed. Unfortunately, the TSG includes criterion that allows for continued sprawl development outside of VMT efficient areas, inconsistent with SANDAG's sustainable community strategy land use patterns and regional and state climate targets. We oppose the use of overly broad infill plus village buffer and overly speculative transit opportunity area as screening criterion, which is in mostly VMT inefficient areas. We recommend that the TSG only exempt 100% affordable housing developments in VMT efficient areas or in transit priority areas from VMT analysis and mitigation. Affordable housing must be defined as deed restricted up to 80% AMI to prioritize streamlining for low and very low income housing. Lastly, without large investments in building out our public transportation infrastructure, TOAs will continue to be disconnected, therefore increasing VMT in areas abstractly classified as TOAs, whether the development is infill, residential.
Thank you. Your time is up. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Supervisors. This is Michael Alty, attorney with Lemandry and Jonah on behalf of Indian Creek Associates. Our client owns property in the area of Valley Center that is known as the North Village. We noticed that the proposed transportation study guide includes screening criteria that will allow projects in infill areas and immediately surrounding villages within TOAs to move forward without VMT analysis or VMT mitigation. As applied, this screening criteria would be highly limited in its implementation because so few areas actually qualify for that exemption, and they're only located on the extreme western fringes of the county. We believe that the screening criteria must be broadened to allow certain areas identified as villages in the general plan to move forward without VMT analysis or mitigation, even if they are not currently located within or adjacent to infill areas or TOAs. We applaud staff for their hard work in putting together the draft TSG, but at the same time, the work must be based in reality. The county's general plan, including the land use element and the housing element, calls for the creation of more housing, including villages. The housing element itself states that the county should not unnecessarily constrain the development, improvement, or conservation of housing. Government Code Section 65589.5, codified last year, stated that housing is a critical problem threatening the economic, environmental, social quality of life in California, with housing here the most expensive in the nation. The state has also declared that local and state governments have a responsibility to use their powers to facilitate the improvement and development of housing. The proposed TSG, as currently worded without these exemptions for the villages, will impair the supply of housing, the future production of housing, and therefore increase any housing.
Thank you. Your time's up. We'll go to the next caller.
Carl Higgins. Good morning, Supervisors. My name is Carl Higgins. I'm here on behalf of Warner Springs Highlands, a 28-lot project. We're here to discuss clarity on small project exemptions. Our goal is respectfully asking direction from the dais to clarify the issue of small project exemptions. The draft TSG contains language on the exemption that speaks to 180T in one sentence. Unfortunately, a second sentence on exemptions is creating significant confusion. That sentence is 11 units of residential. Some county project managers agree that there should be an exemption. Other executive managers do not agree. The 11 residential units reference is simply an example. 110 ADDs could and does apply to other land use categories as well. There are also residential projects that are more than 11 units and less than 110 ADTs. Warner Springs Highlands, a second home vacation community planned for Warner Springs, is such a specific example. Based on professionally conducted trip generation studies, that project shows 95 ADTs. And as you've just seen in the staff presentations this morning, they are recommending adoption of the 110 ADT threshold. We support that. The mention of 11 residential units in conjunction with the threshold is problematic. Sometimes it's in the slides, sometimes it's not. In closing, we respectfully ask for direction from the dais that if a residential project conducts a protocol-based traffic generation study that shows less than 110 ADTs and is more than 11 units, it is still a small project qualifying for VMT adoption. Thank you, Supervisors.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Fletcher and fellow Board of Supervisors. My name is Travis Lyon. I'm the Planning Group Chair for the community of Alpine, and I'm speaking on its behalf today. I want to start by saying thank you to staff for your work to date. I know a tremendous amount of work has gone into this, and I appreciate the progress we've made over the last year. I want to echo previous speakers who have offered their support for the recommendations made by the Planning Commission. Thank you, Chair Barnhart, for your well-reasoned solutions. I want to offer some additional context. Though anecdotal, I think it mirrors and represents what you've heard from other unincorporated communities like Alpine. In addition to being the planning group chair, I serve as a board of trustee for our local school district. I can tell you that the largest challenge that we face in retaining and recruiting high quality teachers is the high cost of housing and the challenges in commuting to Alpine to work. We've even, as a school district, revisited some of our excess land and thought, should we be developing this in partnership with developers to provide housing for our teachers? Some of these changes are going to remove that option from the table as we work to creatively address the issues we face. So I'm going to close by asking you please to consider exempting the unincorporated villages like Alpine, Ramona, and Valley Center from VMT analysis. These areas have been an integral component of the county's long-term plans for decades. Significant amount of investment has gone into public infrastructure, such as water, sewer, and other roads that service these unincorporated villages that have been part of the county's plan for decades. Please consider exempting them and exercise the discretion that you have. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Chairman Fletcher and Supervisors. I am Rita Mahoney from Coleridge. I am virtually attending today to discuss the District 5 State Density Bonus Quest Haven project. Staff is recommending removing the link between fire hazard severity zones and VMT. I support this recommendation, and I thank staff for their wisdom and all of their hard work the last several months. I believe the infill calculations are skewed and are not working properly for Quest Haven and for other projects just like it. Our transportation expert already spoke to this analysis. I'm asking that you direct staff to work with us and others in determining this site and others as an infill location, since we're next to San Marcos and Carlsbad. This site was a former property-specific report project because county staff considered it suitable for extraordinary development. The project's location provides easy access to jobs, to existing retail service, and to North County Transit District facilities. We've been working on this general plan, San Diego community plan, and zoning consistent project since we submitted it in August of 2019. Everything has been on hold due to the paralysis caused by VMT. This state density bonus housing is desperately needed. Please do not unnecessarily tie VMT to wildfire, and please direct staff to fine-tune all appropriate infill sites. Thank you for your consideration of these important provisions.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Emily Caldwell with T&D Planning.
I'm a land use and CEQA consultant here today on behalf of the Quest Haven project, which is currently in process with the county. You've already heard from our team, but just as previously noted, this project would provide 76 homes with 7 set aside for low-income affordable housing next to San Marcos and Carlsbad. I would like to clarify that my position is not purely opposed, but in support with modifications. I would like to support staff's current recommendation to remove the fire maps as a VMT analysis criteria, and I would also like to thank staff for this recommendation. I would like to ask the board to please direct staff to reevaluate the analysis supporting infill development. As noted in the letter sent Friday by Heather Riley and our transportation expert, CR Associate, the Quest Haven site and many sites like it should have the opportunity to be reevaluated as infill development. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Board. My name is Bo Mazzetti, Chairman, Rincon Tribe, and President of the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. The VMT concept will have a negative effect on all 18 tribes in San Diego County. Although your laws and ordinances do not apply on our land, the VMT will affect the thousands of individuals that the tribes throughout this county employ. There should be an exemption that if you live further than a mile from a transit center, there should be an exemption to the VMT. I just want the board and the staff to look at the impact on the tribes in San Diego County. Also, I'd like for you to consider not just battery power. Let's look at hydrogen. If you want to help the climate, hydrogen is the way to go. And I'd like to recommend that the board look into that also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Chair Fletcher and Supervisors. My name is Livia Borak-Bowden. I'm testifying on behalf of Coastal Environmental Rights Foundation. SURF requests the county adopt the regional baseline and affordable housing exemption, but otherwise delay adoption of the TSG. The county's remaining vacant parcels and those with redevelopment potential in so-called infill areas provide an opportunity to create more and better housing where it makes the most sense. To ensure such projects don't cause VMT impacts and support transit infrastructure, we urge you to delay the approval of the TSG until it can be aligned with a sustainable land use framework and mitigation. If we had mitigation in place, we wouldn't have to fabricate the infill areas in the first place. The articulated purpose of the infill areas is to promote and streamline development within the county's denser village areas to create greater diversity of land uses to support transit service in the future. But adoption today of the TSG won't achieve the desired results. The poster child of that is the Escondido Estates project. It's a 10-acre project on a vacant property with 20 proposed half-acre single-family residential lots. These mini mansions will be 4 to 5 bedrooms on septic without infrastructure, 2.7 miles from the Escondido Transit Center. It's proposed within a purported infill area, but it won't provide the density necessary to increase transit services. It also won't mitigate its VMT because it's in a purported infill area. The applicant has maintained it would build more density, but the current zoning and general plan and lack of infrastructure prevent such development. Therefore, the sustainable land use framework and parcel-by-parcel analysis must precede the TSG. Otherwise, the county is providing developers a pass on VMT analysis without the articulated purported benefit and without paying their fair share for the infrastructure necessary to truly decrease VMT in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning, Chair Fletcher and Board of Supervisors. My name is Angelique Kalanog, representing the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, whose mission is to make the San Diego region the best place to live and work. We represent many different industries that will be affected by the draft TSG. Moreover, the update provided today emphasizes our concern that stricter VMT guidelines will severely limit the potential to create more affordable and accessible housing. Since we've last commented on BMT, housing inventory still remains very low, and the median home price has increased to nearly $910,000. This is a price that working families, retirees, minorities, and more cannot obtain. We know and appreciate that the board has directed staff to explore incentives and regulatory reforms to build more affordable and middle-income housing. We encourage staff to start right away on this to explore creative solutions and to continue the discussions with local and state agencies on how you can address these issues. And in regards to phase 2, it is crucial that the opportunity to create reasonable VMT mitigation options and TDM strategies with stakeholder input should still be considered to provide flexibility for all industries. So while we have some concerns with what is being presented today, I want to thank staff and also the board and their staff for their work on this and for making sure that all the feedback has been heard. The Chamber remains committed to working with our region's leaders and finding ways to address our housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Yes, hi. My name is J.P. Kabarge. I am the chair of the Elkins Forest Harmon Grove Town Council. I'm also the founder of Grow the San Diego Way. I'll let the environmentalists weigh in on whether or not this TSG meets the intent of SB 743. Essentially, the goal is to reduce sprawl by lowering VMTs and incentivizing infill. My comments are about the very high fire severity exclusion. In the previous iteration of the TSG, the county smartly excluded very high fire severity areas from consideration as potential infill areas. Given the increasing risk of wildfires due to climate change and the fact that San Diego County is among the most fire-prone counties in the state, it made sense to exclude these areas from consideration as potential infill. Wide body of research shows the building in the WUI, wildland-urban interface, very strongly correlated with increased property loss and damages during wildfire. Expanding the WUI is dangerous. However, upon reviewing the revisions being proposed for today, I noticed that very high fire severity zones were no longer being excluded. Unbelievably, it appears this decision was made in a closed session without the possibility of public comment, which doesn't seem to be in the spirit of the Brown Act. It turns out that lobbyists from Latham and Watkins encouraged the county to remove the exception across the board in the entire county on behalf of a small developer in Lakeside who might be impacted. The BIA, who has always advocated for building in fire-prone areas, also lobbied on this topic. The wise choice would be to address this issue on a parcel-by-parcel basis, creating exceptions if warranted. Instead, the county chose to simply remove the exception altogether to placate lobbyists. We respectfully ask that, if necessary, the county be more targeted as to how they define infill and very high fire severity zones to allow for reasonable exceptions while protecting communities. For example, targeting so-called infill areas that still have a large amount of capacity, or requiring those areas that have requiring that they have ample evacuation infrastructure, or that they not be adjacent to large swaths of flammable habitat. Please reconsider this blanket allowance of infill areas of very high fire severity zones. It's a little tone deaf and makes unincorporated communities feel that the county cares more about what.
Thank you. Your time is up. We'll go to the next caller.
Fire-prone communities.
Paul Hinken. Thank you, Oliver Twist. I found your comment on this very insightful and positive, and supervisors, you do well to listen to those and similar positive comments. I am tired of the board pitting people against each other, black and white, gay and not, East County and West County, farms and cities. But this is really lame. The miles traveled tax would pit East County against West County and also rich against poor. Most people in East County with its sparse groceries, supply stores, and schools and so on have to travel farther than us coastal dwellers. They have lots of these resources. They also have most of the good jobs, so there's a lot of commuting for the East County folks. And then they'd end up paying a lot more tax. Residents of West County have big freeways nearby, like the I-5, the I-15, and 805, all within a few miles of each other. These help shorten our commute as well. How will you enforce the tax? How much will it cost for all of bureaucracy and such like involved. This text does not allow for income differences either. That is not fair or equitable. It takes from the poor and gives to the rich. You need to reject this idea permanently. And by the way, SB 743, I think that's the number, gives you guys latitude to impose a more reasonable tax. But, you know, it's not like this is an extreme idea.
Thank you. Your time is up. We'll go to the next caller.
Good morning. Chair Fletcher, members of the board, Dan Silver, Endangered Habitats League. The map of VMT exempt locations, which are close in rather than remote, is sound. This is a major accomplishment. But the total number of units, over 5,800, is more than ample. And so there's still time to consider the 110 ADT exemption, which was designed for urban locations and not for example, ultra-remote Warner Springs Highlands. Otherwise, EHL would not object to the removal of the high fire hazard zone exclusion if fire hazard is adequately addressed. We note that these locations would be within existing communities and would not expand the WUI. But we do object to the inadequate suite of measures, 1, 2, and 3, in the staff recommendation for revised fire guidelines. Taken alone, these send the signal that WUI expansion can be rendered safe when we know from fact and history that it cannot. Taken alone, these measures represent the failed status quo and at worst would provide an illusion of safety. For these reasons, it is essential for your board to address the root of the problem, which is putting more and more life and property at risk outside of existing communities and continuing to expand the urban wildland interface through density increases. Option 4, zoning overlays, and Option 5, replanning, are essential and should move forward. Unless Options 3 and 4 are moved forward as well, we cannot support eliminating the exclusion for high fire zones. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Non-stakeholder truth here. Douglas Barnhart, VMT is unreasonable, and there's no collective wisdom to be had here. Justin Schleify called your agenda out earlier in the consent. You should have a listen. The presentation wants alternative transportation in the unincorporated area. Yeah, right. You guys mean no transportation, hence VMT. And fire hazard, that's exactly what high-density housing will result in. Jim, you said you opposed the 2030 state road usage charge in Sandag's regional plan, but you've never opposed vehicle miles travel fees. As you know, VMT fees affect what types of housing gets built and where, land use including agricultural, so what food is available, aka Nathan's friends at the World Economic Forum would like us to beg for bugs, and VMT fees also affect where people can drive, because only approved forms of transportation will be invested in. That is, the roads will eventually be left to deteriorate, while public transit temporarily will see investment. Until the time the hammers slam down and only active transportation, that's walking and biking, is deemed sustainable. It aligns with Sandag's objectives of focusing population in mobility hubs, reducing sprawl, that's suburban and rural homes, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. It's the same thing as the county's regional decarbonization framework that also wants reduced vehicle miles traveled and 4+ story buildings, infill, landfill, stack and pack housing with complete streets that you approved, Jim. You see, you're not really against anything at all, Jim. You just want it to look that way. But anyone who wants to understand what's going on with all these VMT fees and high-density housing popping up everywhere, just read the United Nations Agenda 21 plan. It's all in there. I'd also recommend people listen to a Rosa Corey video because she broke it down at the local level. These plans are all over the world.
Thank you. Your time is up. And Chair Fletcher, that concludes public comment on this item.
All right. Thank you, For our speakers who are here, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. This is certainly not the first time we've seen this as a board. Look, the reality is change is hard. Change is a difficult thing to absorb, and the 743 change is a fundamentally different approach to land use than what the state of California has historically done. And it is a difficult thing. When you acknowledge that we must simultaneously reduce greenhouse gas emissions and we must build more housing, it requires a fundamentally different approach. And that, at its root, is an incredibly difficult thing to absorb. Now, I'll point out, SB 743 passed in 2013, almost a decade ago. This was put into law, and folks have known that this change was coming. Our board, as a board, didn't get actively engaged in this until, I think, 2020, and here we are now, past the deadline to move forward and implement this, wrestling with how we do it. What I'll say in regards to those who say we shouldn't do a regional average, we should just do a sub-regional average, is that is willfully and knowingly ignoring the state guidance. OPR is the state entity that is tasked with setting the guidelines for the implementation of SB 743, and they are explicitly clear that you have to adopt a regional average. They're not saying maybe if you want to, they are explicitly clear. And so as a board, I believe it would be reckless and irresponsible for us to ignore what is outlined and told for us to do. Now, if we were to ignore that and say, well, let's just do it and see what happens, it would be consistent with a lot of what this board has done over the last decade. First time the Climate Action Plan came up, folks said, hey, we think you violate state law. And this board said, no, we'll be okay. And then we lost in court. And then we did Climate Action Plan number 2, and folks said, hey, probably not consistent with state law. And the board said, we'll be okay. And then we lost in court. And then we had Harmony Grove, and folks said, hey, you know, that's probably not going to survive. And this board said, we think we'll be okay. And we lost in court. And then Otay 250. Folks said, hey, you probably shouldn't do that. It's not going to work. The board said, no, let's pass it. And we lost in court. The same with Village 13, Village 14, Valiano, and Newland Sierra. The county has spent a decade voting to approve things that feel good that never actually happen. And I think we got to stop doing that. I think we have to stop doing that. We need to get in a place where there is some certainty around what we're doing. We need to stop wasting years of our life in litigation for things where we will lose. If we do not adopt a regional average, it is abundantly clear from our own counsel that we will lose. So let's move forward and stop repeating the mistakes of the past and actually adopt the regional average. Now, is the regional average going to be the end of the world? It is not. It's not. And this goes to the second point. There's this notion that the county was just this housing production machine until this concept of SB 743 arrived. That's not true. In the 7 years before I joined this board, the county averaged, on average, 700 units a year. That's it. Not spectacular, not great, not on path to meet your RHNA numbers. Now, they approved a lot more than that, but approving things that never get built doesn't help anyone actually get a home. In the 4 years since we've been here, we've upped it a little bit, over 1,000 a year, but still not where we need to be. And so if we move forward, as was outlined, there are ample opportunities. The VMT efficient areas, combined with the infill area, provide thousands of units of housing that can be built without VMT cost, without VMT mitigation. When you realize those can be built without VMT mitigation and you take into account what we're doing to lower the cost of levels of service mitigation, you see how we're actually lowering the cost of building housing in significant areas. Buena Creek, 1,800 units of housing. Lakeside, over 1,000 units of housing. Spring Valley, 700 units of housing. Thousands of units in the unincorporated area that can ensure that we are building more housing than we've ever built before and do it cheaper than it has been an option prior to this action. The notion that we're going to meet the entire county's housing goal in the unincorporated area is not real. The notion that we can do more than we've ever done and certainly do our fair share of the state housing element in hitting our RHNA goals is an achievable goal that a lot of jurisdictions don't have a viable plan to get to. Because we not only have to comply with SB 743, we have to comply with the state housing element and with our RHNA numbers. 6,700 is our goal. We have built more than 2,000 already. And if we can move forward aggressively in a responsible way, I believe that we can get there. The VMT efficient areas provide options. The infill areas provide options. The small housing projects that are VMT efficient provide options. The locally serving retail, the 100% affordable, the transit area prioritization, all provide us options for how we can move forward. And so I think as a board, we need to move forward. I hear the folks who say don't adopt the TSG, let's wait. And the mitigation component is really important. That is a long-term important component. It is also going to take a little bit to get that adopted. And I don't know that we can wait for our land use and sustainability framework and our mitigation plan and everything else we're doing. I think we need to get a TSG in place. And we can adapt and mold as we go forward. The infill areas, I hear the folks that are concerned about the infill areas and don't want those included. But the reality is infill areas are where we need to build housing. And this map is not a wide open for suburban sprawl and awful areas. These infill areas are where housing should go. And we need to move forward because we're not just going to comply with 743. We're going to have to comply with our RENA numbers. And I don't believe we can get there absent the ability to expedite development in these infill areas. And so I think those are things that we need to do. As it relates to the fire severity, the very high and high fire areas, I don't think we should continue to include them in VMT, not because I think we should build in those areas. And let me be clear, not because I think we should build in very high fire areas, but because I don't think it is legally defensible to include this as a component of VMT. And so I think by removing that and adopting all of the recommendations to have us build a comprehensive and thoughtful approach to fire, then we can have the tools we need to evaluate projects in a reasonable way as they come forward. I think including them and leaving them here in VMT is just a recipe to have it struck down and again continue the efforts around litigation. And so I would make a motion to adopt the staff recommendations, which would adopt the TSG, which would include the infill areas, which would remove high and very high fire. I would include all of the recommendations in number 4 around adopting our fire safety standards that we need to move forward. I think that this action and effort will probably sufficiently piss off everyone who's a stakeholder in this process, but I think that it represents as a board our best opportunity to move forward consistent with SB 743 and the goal and the intention, and to actually give us the best opportunity to build the housing that our residents so critically need and allow us to begin putting in place the pieces we need to move forward. And so that would be my motion to get us started.
I'll second.
We have a second by Vice Chair Vargas, and then we'll go to each of my colleagues who will have comments. Vice Chair Vargas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you first and foremost to our planning department staff for all of the work. Also, thank you for making sure that this analysis included all of our stakeholders, and like the chair said, not going to make everybody happy today, but it's our job to do the best that we can to make sure that we're implementing and following state law. The one clarification that I would like to have is around affordable housing. If you could clarify for me how affordable housing is defined, it's important for me to really understand on the record what that looks like.
Vice Chair Vargas to the chair. We don't specifically define affordable housing in the transportation study guide. We rely on the state definition, which has the various income levels that they use. They range from all the way up to 120% AMI in terms of moderate income housing. So we would rely on the state definitions, not particularly defined in our TSG.
Okay, so I don't think, just for clarification, I don't think we need an additional amendment to state that we want to make sure that the 120 AMI is included in it, right? It's just, I think it's, as long as it's on record, I think it's important for me. I mean, yesterday we went ahead and introduced some policy specific to middle income communities, and we want to make sure we address that. So I want to make sure that's on record, and I think that's enough for that piece, right? So with that, thank you, and I'm happy to support this information.
Supervisor Desmond.
I'm sorry, Supervisor Vargas, was that part of the motion for affordable housing?
No, I think what I needed clarification is what does it actually what is affordable housing? How do we define it? And so you want to go ahead and.
It goes up to 120.
It goes up to 120, and our recommendation would be, Supervisor Desmond, to keep it consistent with state law. And so if that changes at some point, we can certainly bring that back before the board, if that would be helpful.
All right.
But as it is, state law gets you up to 120 AMI, so that would be included in what we're doing today.
Okay. I got a question and then some comments here. And on the, I guess this is for Mark. On the 11, it used to be, we were talking about the 11080 Ts to be, I guess, VMT exempt. And then when there was attached a number of houses. And I noticed in today's language, the housing was out and there was a caller or two that mentioned, what is it? Is it either or is it just 110?
Supervisor Desmond through the chair, the TSG defines it as 110 average daily trips. The 11 single-family homes was an example that was provided. It could be 15 multifamily homes. It's anything that would be under 110 average daily trips, not limited to 11 single-family homes.
Okay, thank you. And then just, my comments on this is, the VMT is really, I think, kind of a wrench here in the ointment in the fact that it's making housing, we're having less opportunities for housing and it's getting more expensive. And Gerald, I don't agree that the regional approach is mandatory. It's not. It's a guidance, and we could still do the unincorporated approach as opposed to the regional, and it even states in here in the board letter, let's see, let me get where, page 10, second paragraph, although the OPR technical advisory is intended to provide advice and recommendations, it's not mandatory, as directed by item 7 above. I mean, the city of San Diego, they went with regional, and primarily because that provided them more housing opportunities, because they compared themselves with the unincorporated area, with Ramona and Valley Center and all that, so they were allowed to put in more housing. By us going with regional, it restricts the number of housing that we can put in. Currently, our general plan's at 58,000 potential units. Going with the regional average, that reduces it by 90%. And this is a time we should be building houses. We should have the door open to housing. And the two biggest issues in this state are homelessness and affordable housing for everybody. And I do think it's noble that we want to build around where rail and where transit exists. That's good. But not everybody's going to be 27 years old for the rest of their lives. They're going to want single-family homes. They're going to want the house with the yard. They want to raise their family someplace else. And quite frankly, even like being on NCTD, knowing the coaster that goes up and down, all from Oceanside, Carlsbad, Encinitas, Del Mar, Solana Beach. Del Mar doesn't even have a stop. They won't even let the train stop there anymore. And to have infill in those areas, it's going to be so costly. It's just going to be unaffordable, I think, for those types of housing. And then even for the transit accessible area, to be considered a transit stop, you have to have no less than 15-minute durations between buses during peaks and commute times. That's going to be never in the unincorporated area. To have 15-minute headways between buses, I mean, it's like daily at this point now. So, I'm just think we should be building more houses. And if we did the unincorporated average, we'd have up to almost 19,000 potential units within the county. Now, we don't have to build all 19,000. We could still just do the RENA requirement of 6,700, but we would have more opportunities and maybe not in the fire zones. We'd have more units or more lots to maybe put housing if we went to the unincorporated model, which allows for 19,000 units, whereas the regional model only provides about 5,800 units. And it is a noble cause that we have built over 2,000 units to date, I think, which is phenomenal. But on the extremely and very low, we're supposed to produce 1,800 affordable housing units between now and 2028. We've only built 66. We're way, way below. So by having more potential sites and more potential units using the unincorporated model, we might reach that goal. We'd have a better chance, because at this rate, we should have actually about 500 extremely low and very low. We only have 66. So meeting that criteria. So all I'm really asking for is, why don't we use the unincorporated number so that we have more possibilities to build the 6,700 units, and we can vote them up or down. We don't have to build them all the 19,000 in the unincorporated area, but it gives us more potential and more opportunity, more lots, more units to work with at a time when, we all talk about, well, it's the VMT and everything else and we all kind of ignore thousands of cars going to Riverside County and living up there. So, I agree with taking and removing the requirement, for the high fire area. I agree with that. I agree with, doing the parcel by parcel analysis. I just think if we went to and it's not the recommended, but it's an option to do the unincorporated average and put that onus on ourselves. It would give us more lots to particularly build upon. And I do like what the Planning Commission came up with, particularly, that of using the unincorporated and, getting rid of potentially of the 15% less VMT on the regional, and I think even on the unincorporated average. So I want to get as many houses built as we possibly can. In San Marcos, we built a ton of affordable housing. I'm on first name basis with many of the affordable housing builders, one of which is on our planning commission that voted for this, for the unincorporated change. And we built affordable housing because we put the welcome mat out. Instead of we're closing the door by 90% with the regional average. So I'll stop my rant and everything, but I really think we would have more potential to build more housing if we use the unincorporated value, and more potential to build that 6,700 units by, I think it's 2028, 2029, 28 or 9, 29. So anyway, I'd like to make a substitute motion that we items 1, 2, keep items 1, 2, 4A, 4B, 4C, and 5, but in item 3 to return to the unincorporated vehicle miles traveled for new projects instead of the regional, and to reconsider the threshold by the State Office of Planning and Research that new projects should produce no more than the VMT of the unincorporated average.
All right, we have a substitute motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it. I would like to ask the motion maker to also include the AMI at 120.
The AMI at 120.
Supervisor.
Okay, but wasn't that discussed earlier?
You don't have to do that. It's already consistent with state law. But it's your all's motion. You can include it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion by substitute motion by Supervisor Desmond, seconded by Supervisor Anderson. Let me ask the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Supervisor Anderson.
Aye.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
No.
Supervisor Desmond.
Aye.
Vice Chair Vargas.
Vargas, no.
Chair Fletcher.
Fletcher, no.
That motion fails due to a lack of sufficient votes.
All right, we're back to the original motion in second. Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. I thought you did a very nice job of laying out the challenges that we're facing, because none of this is easy. We both know that the legislature frequently, with a good heart, passes bad legislation, and they don't give us the tools to implement it in a meaningful way for our community. But Supervisor Vargas, I just want to thank you for the AMI clarification. I think that's really important as we move forward, and I really appreciate your commitment to middle-class housing, middle-income housing. But I did go through this, and, when I look at, I'm not against the VMT if implemented correctly. Every time I knocked on doors in my district, and maybe you all experienced this too, nobody said, my gosh, when you get elected, will you increase my commute to work? Will you make it difficult for me to get home so I can see my kids and maybe miss their kindergarten parade? They didn't say, my air is too clean, I want more pollutants. And while you're at it, give me some dirty water. Nobody ever said that. So we all agree that these lofty goals are great to increase our quality of life in our community. But the question is, are we on the path of feeling good or doing good? And when I look at this, and there's over 100,000 people who live outside our district, that's what, 3% of our county's population working in our county, living elsewhere. And the Voice of San Diego coined a new term, housing refugees. And when I look at that and I say, well, where are they living? And you look at the numbers, they're all doing a minimum of 100 miles round trip. 100 miles. That's 1 million trips. That's crazy. And yet, somehow, building slightly out of the VMT is a bad thing, allowing these people and promoting it. You know, I think that we're on a path that we're creating the biggest suburb of San Diegans living in Riverside County. And I don't see how 65,000 people in Riverside is helpful to us making that huge commute. So one of the things I'd like to look at is, look, East County, and I'm only speaking about my areas, but reducing us to fewer than 6,000 houses for all the unincorporated will not solve this problem. And yet we know this is the greatest polluter going on and the people having the least quality of life. But when you look at that, you say, well, okay, we have to follow within the constraints of the state law. We have to meet all this regulation. But you know what? We sent a man to the moon over 50 years ago with a slide ruler. Today we have computers. Why can't we reverse this and instruct staff to go back and look at mass transit? And what would San Diego have to do to be inclusive to include these communities? You know, why are they lesser citizens and they don't have the same access to a higher quality of life? When we start thinking about the health index, well, at one point, Ramona didn't have a trolley, and then later they removed it. But, you know, in Ramona and in Valley Center and some of these other communities, if we built out there, they have the capacity to grow. We would meet VMT because there's two elements, right? We could bring the transportation to them. Now, I'm old enough to remember that in the 80s, we decided to go to UTC, and 35 years later, it was built. So we've got time to plan for the future in a meaningful way that allows those communities. And, you know, I listened to the Water District. They built on a village that we promised them, not us personally, but this board did. And so they built out, and they put in pipes thinking that later there'd be economies of scale. Now, I spent a little time on the water board, and I can tell you, you put a fire hydrant in a cul-de-sac, and pretty soon that water goes stale because you're not moving enough of it. Then you have to put a chlorine injector so that the water doesn't go stale. And people all complain they're drinking pool water. They put infrastructure in based on a commitment to them. We could actually achieve their goal, our goal, but most importantly, we would repatriate potentially over 100,000 people that commute to work here. I know of 2 people that live in Yuma and commute to the district. We could repatriate those folks into the county in a meaningful way that meet, I thought you'd like that, that would meet all the climate goals we want, improving our quality, and yet not be stymied by blowing the socks off of the boxes and making things work. And you know, one of the things I really love about working with all of you is you have made challenges to our system that we haven't gone through in decades. Nathan, with your behavioral health and all the work you've done, you've blown that wide open, and we have better services than ever before. Every one of us has brought a new idea. I'd like for us to capture those new ideas and put it towards the greater good, which is meeting those climate goals of repatriating those 100,000 people. At 6,000 homes, or fewer than 6,000 homes. I looked, and Nathan, since you started on this board, that number of 600 increased to over 1,000. Good job. But at 1,100 homes, then we're going to be tapped out in 6 years and just close the county. We're done. So this notion that we have any chance at repatriating those folks, and I get it, we're not going to go it alone. The city has to do stuff too. But we're now reducing that number by 90% because we refuse to give people transit opportunities that deserve the same opportunities as UTC or any place else in our city. So I would ask that, and I don't, I'm listening to everybody, so this is kind of organic. Normally I like to write my little things and pass it to you, but I don't have anything. But perhaps it's a question to Sarah. Sarah, what would we need to do to help identify potential transit that would meet the VMT that we could, and I'm going to bring back a board letter to lobby Sandag to ask that we be treated as equals to everybody else in the county with the same opportunities at transit and the same opportunities of growing our community.
I think Supervisor Anderson and Sarah and staff let us know you're asking us to direct staff to explore the necessary steps to create new VMT efficient areas.
And if I heard correctly, also what we would need to bring public transit to those communities.
Right, and it can take 35 years. I get it. That's what the last one took.
Right. We can work and partner with Sandag and MTS and North County Transit District. Actually, we've done some of that evaluation ourselves with VMT and the journey that we've been on. So we're happy to pursue that. We can look as it relates to the villages that we have, because I think that's the other thing that I heard based on community members from Ramona who had mentioned some of their areas of concern that they're no longer considered infill areas. So we'll be happy to take a look at that.
We can add that if
we know trolleys take a long time.
Understood.
So maybe there's some interim choices we can do along the way with the goal of making sure access to everyone. Yeah. And but I need to do a shout out to your team and the great work you've done. I've asked some questions about this in the past, so I know that you're familiar with the subject matter. But when I think about moving forward with this, I can't commit to this plan today because I'm not going to make future suburbs of San Diego and Riverside. And what I could support is bringing this online so we have this choice coming down the road. I am not going to accept that I'm going to fail my constituents with the housing that they deserve, and I'm not going to continue on a path that we've done in the past, failing them and forcing them to live outside the county and pretend not to count them. I'm going to count them.
Understood.
These people are suffering, and I'm not going to be part of it.
Got it. So is So Supervisor Anderson, are you asking for an amendment to include directing staff to explore options for how we would create new VMT efficient areas with transit or other connections?
But move forward. A plan that we could, as an alternate.
Okay. Look, I support that. I'm okay with that. Vice Chair's fine with that. We're happy to add that in, Supervisor Anderson, to make it a part of the overall effort. And I think we've talked about this previously. I mean, my hope as we come back with VMT mitigation is to the extent you do mitigation, that goes into something that can create new connections, transportation connections that can then facilitate the establishment of new VMT efficient areas. And I think that should be the goal, and that's the way I think the program will work. So happy to accept your amendment.
And I have one additional one.
Of course.
This is a small, easy one. So I'd also like to direct staff to study the potential of allowing new and expanded wineries in communities like Ramona and Hamul if they can show that they would not increase overall VMT and bring forward options for the board to consider. You know, the beauty of wineries is it's agriculture, it's good to address carbon. They have a deep root, they don't require a lot of watering, and there's not a lot to burn down if they do catch fire. So this is I'd like to also include that as a separate motion, and usually you take—
It's not a separate motion, an amendment.
Yeah,
an amendment?
Separate amendment.
Okay.
Is that community specific or?
I'm happy.
And open it up to wherever you like, Jim.
Happy to
I'm always inclusive.
Happy to accept that. Okay. Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
Well, thank you all to my colleagues and to everyone, really. I mean, there's a lot here, so I have a number of things to say. I first really just want to begin by thanking our team. I understand how much work this has been, and you've done an extraordinary job of trying to balance so many different interests, and the fact that everyone who turned out was a little bit mad, and I think is in many ways evidence to how good of a job you've done of having diverse outreach to the community. So Mark and Jacob and Davia, thank you all so much for all of your work. So I just want to, kind of address a number of issues. I think first of all, at core, let's remember that this is in response to state law, which we need to come into compliance with state law. And if we do not, we will continue to have ongoing uncertainty regarding where and how we can build across San Diego County, which is fundamentally worse for everyone than if we just get ourselves on the right page and on the right track and pass some policies and regulations at our county that will withstand litigation, that we can rely on and that we can make plans around. Because I know how important certainty is for development, for our communities. And when you have that kind of uncertainty, it makes everything more difficult. It makes housing investments more difficult. It makes all kinds of planning more difficult. So coming into compliance with state law in a way that we know is going to withstand legal scrutiny, is going to stand up in court, is very, very critical. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's also because it's what's important to our local economy and to our local planning efforts. And I think it's important to note that that this approach is so thoughtful because it does follow OPR guidance. It is the only approach that we are sure is going to withstand a lawsuit. But it also identifies a set of infill exemptions that do meet the substantial evidence standard to be in compliance with SB 743, even though they are above the VMT regional average guidance within OPR. So I think the work that staff has done to thread the needle to find an approach that both complies with OPR, but also uses a substantial evidence approach to ensure that we can build infill in places where it makes sense to do so, when it's dense, when it's transit supported, where it's near jobs and schools and amenities. I think is just such a tremendous amount of work from a technical standpoint, but also in terms of really trying to balance all the competing voices and interests in our community. So zooming back from the core legal issues in front of us, I do think it's important to emphasize that what I think is so sort of like impressive about the recommendations that staff have outlined is that they do an enormous job of both reducing our GHG emissions, both taking action immediately on our climate emergency, acknowledging that we are facing rising sea levels, we're facing wildfires, we're facing heat waves, we're facing a climate crisis that requires us to act from an ethical and moral perspective to protect future generations, that we have a responsibility to act on climate and act on climate now with the urgency it deserves, while also creating a pathway to build more affordable homes in our county than was previously permitted and allowed and expected under the SANDAG plan. So to have come up with an approach that simultaneously gets us to more housing and protects our climate for future generations is exactly the kind of leadership and diligence and hard work that I'm just so proud that our county staff could bring to bear, and is why I will be supporting this today. And I think it's important to foreground what SB 743 intended to do, and at the same time what the staff recommendation will do for San Diego County. It will make it easier to build. It will reduce regulations. It will make building simpler, faster, and more streamlined in the areas that are exempted, in the infill areas, in the places on the map that we already know are transit supported, are dense, and are the places that it makes sense to build from an environmental and a climate perspective. It is going to make it easier to build in those VMT efficient areas. So we have a proposal on the table that makes it easier to build in the right places, and I think is going to spur housing investment and spur housing development if you look at the map and look at all those places where we now are going to have streamlined approaches to building homes in the communities that need them most. And at the same time, we'll take off the table some of the building, the biggest buildings in places that don't make sense to build. let's also acknowledge and remember and remind everyone that even when there is building to even in areas that are not VMT efficient, according to the analysis, there's still going to be pathways and opportunities for mitigation. So one of the things that I know I'm looking forward to, that as staff continues to develop our land use framework, is the mitigation opportunities that are going to be outlined in coming board actions. So I think what this does is it creates incentives to build in the right places, and it creates opportunities to pool resources and investments around mitigation to continue meeting our climate goals while also investing in affordable housing and transit and density. So I think that it's not just that this is a compromise, which it is. I actually think it's a win-win. And to be able to have a proposal on the table that leads to both climate action that is the right thing for protecting future generations, for taking action on wildfires and rising sea levels and desertification, while at the same time addressing our affordable housing crisis across San Diego County, I think that's an extraordinary step forward and something I'm just, frankly, incredibly impressed and very proud to be a part of bringing forward today. I do want to take a moment to talk about the high fire and very high fire exemptions to the exemption, which is the best way to frame it. That was in the initial proposal, and that is now staff is now recommending to be taken out. We have to move forward with the actions around fire. We face a crisis in San Diego of wildfires. People in our community are threatened every single wildfire season. We know that wildfires are one of the most dangerous threats from an emergency services standpoint that we have to grapple with across our region. And I am very, very, very concerned about building in fire zones. That being said, the purpose of the initiation of this action today was to comply with state regulations around SB 743, and I do concur with staff's analysis that there's not a clear enough nexus between fire and high fire risk and the climate reduction and the GHG reduction targets that are outlined in state law to make it reasonable to include those in today's action. And so I do agree with staff that we should remove those exemptions to the exemption and move forward with staff's recommendation. And then I just want to take a moment to kind of address my colleague, Supervisor Anderson's comments around how do we increase VMT efficient areas, how to increase transit. I agree. I think that's right. I'm very, very supportive of how do we increase areas where you can, live close to work and get to amenities and schools and do this in a way that reduces our carbon footprint and looking at increasing transit investments throughout our community. I think that's absolutely the right way to go. And I hope that we can continue looking more holistically at how do we increase those VMT efficient areas across our county. I think that's exactly the right direction. So all of that being said, again, I know this is one of those days and one of those motions where everyone is going to be a little bit unhappy. And I actually think that is a signal that this is the right direction for our community, and appreciate the leadership of my colleagues in getting us where we are today, and leadership of staff and figuring out an approach that's not just a compromise, but is actually an optimal solution, is increasing housing investments, making it easier to build in the right places, while at the same time ensuring that we're creating incentives to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our GHG emissions, and protect our planet for future generations. So proud to be voting for this today, and thank you for everyone.
Thank you, Supervisor Wasserman. We will go back to Supervisor Desmond.
Thank you, Chair. I just would ask if on the vote, if you could bifurcate and take, I'm in favor of item 1, 2, 4, A, B, C, and 5. If you could bifurcate 3 out of there, which was the TSD, which the staff did a great job on. It's just the regional average. So I was just asking if you could take that out.
Okay. We'll look at it. We'll see. All right. So we have a motion and a second. The motion is to adopt the staff recommendations adopting the TSG, including the infill areas, removing the high and very high fire areas, and adopting all of the recommendations in 4 surrounding fire. We have the addition of Supervisor Anderson's 2 actions that are in addition to those actions directing staff to explore options to help create new VMT-efficient areas and to study plans for new and expanded wineries, if not increasing VMT. I think Supervisor Desmond will just vote on these as a straight-up, all-together package. We have a motion by myself, seconded by Vice Chair Vargas. Let me ask the clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Supervisor Anderson?
Aye.
Supervisor Lawson-Remer?
Aye.
Supervisor Desmond?
Well, just want to note for the record, I'm in favor of 1, 2, 4, A, B, C, and 5, and vote no.
Vice Chair Vargas?
Vargas, yes.
Chair Fletcher?
Fletcher, aye.
That motion passes with Supervisor Desmond voting no, all other supervisors being present voting aye.
We're going to go to our final agenda item. Let's power through and finish. Return back on exploration of community benefits agreement, seeking board direction on program options for future consideration. I will turn it over to staff for their presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Fletcher and Supervisors. I'm Scott Chrisman with Planning and Development Services, and I'm joined by Audrey Hamilton. Last December, the board asked staff to come back with further information on community benefits agreements, or CBAs, including feasibility and resources. Today, we are presenting potential options for CBAs in the unincorporated area and seeking board direction on the types of projects that would participate in their management and funding. Before we get into the project specifics, we want to provide an overview of what CBAs can offer for development projects in the unincorporated area. CBAs are a tool that can help offset local impacts created by large-scale projects like solar fields or industrial warehouses. CBAs can provide social and economic benefits like access to cultural arts, which is often lacking in communities, and create local jobs. CBAs bring residents and project applicants together to identify community concerns and desires in advance of a project. They help the community shape the project and negotiate the benefits they want. Often these negotiated benefits become legally binding agreements, which are referred to as community benefits agreements. We have found through best practice research that the role of a local government varies when supporting or mandating these formal agreements. We carefully reviewed international, national, and local approaches to CBAs for guidance. From our research, 2 things really resonated. Successful CBAs engage the community early in the process, especially those stakeholders in close proximity to a project, and are often provided in return for public incentives due to the legal limitations of mandatory programs. The role of local government in these voluntary CBA programs oftentimes is to provide support and structure for early engagement, program opportunities, provide guidance documents, and potential incentives such as below market rate leases or infrastructure support. One of the legal considerations is a United States Supreme Court case regarding the nexus requirement. This case law establishes that a local jurisdiction cannot require project conditions unless there is a nexus or direct connection to a project impact and the project conditions are proportional to the impacts. For example, if a project's truck traffic leaves dust on or causes damage to nearby roadways, the local agency could require street sweeping and fixing potholes because there is a direct connection between the project impact, truck traffic, and the mitigation, sweeping and fixing potholes. Practically speaking, the nexus requirement limits the situations where the county could require a CBA program, as project impacts are most often mitigated through the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, or other county ordinances. Taking this nexus requirement into consideration, there are several ways the county could support both voluntary and mandatory CBAs. Large-scale projects typically require a preliminary environmental analysis under CEQA called an initial study to determine the project's likely impacts. The initial study is often followed by a comprehensive review of environmental impacts and ways to address or mitigate those impacts. When a project's impacts can be fully mitigated, additional requirements of the project applicant are limited by the nexus requirement, and therefore the county would not be able to require a CBA where the CBA would not reduce the project's impacts. But in those instances, the county could support a voluntary CBA. They could be done by providing guidance documents and preset lists of incentives and benefits or CBA toolkit for project applicants and communities to use. When a project's impacts are unable to be fully mitigated, a statement of overriding considerations would be required to proceed. This is a document that analyzes the project's social and economic benefits that could support approval of the project despite the remaining impacts that would not be fully mitigated. This scenario presents an opportunity for the county to require a CBA between the project applicant and the community in order to augment the project's potential social and economic benefits. In this case, the CBA would be a part of the determination whether a statement of overriding considerations could be approved for the project. Even if a project applicant could not reach an agreement that is supported by the community, the project and benefits package could still be presented to the board for their consideration. The board would decide if the project's benefits outweigh the unmitigated impacts.
Let's talk about what we've heard from the community. Staff conducted a multi-phase public outreach campaign that included virtual, community presentations, and focused conversations with environmental and community industry stakeholders. The community feedback included support of community benefit agreements, how benefits should distribute, and the types of projects that should not be subject to CBAs. We heard from members of the community planning and sponsor groups that mandatory CBAs should be considered for projects which have impacts in a community, but their benefits of the project are provided outside of community, and that a voluntary CBA be considered when a project provides local benefits directly to the community. Environmental groups stated that CBA should focus on helping the environment and that habitat restoration and protection should be considered as benefits funded by future CBAs. Environmental groups also stated that agreements should be enforceable and monitored to ensure success. The land development industry and business groups stated that if a CBA program were to be considered, housing projects should be exempted from participation because more time and cost may impede housing projects. Additionally, staff heard from the Farm Bureau that if a CBA program were to be considered, agricultural projects should be exempted from participation because more time and cost may impede agricultural projects. Labor organizations stated that apprenticeship opportunities for underrepresented groups should be considered through CBAs and that ways to ensure that goals are identified and metrics should be established. Community-based organizations stated that if funds are considered in a CBA, the county should play a role in assuring that funds are directly distributed locally and directly invested in the impacted community. Development of the proposed options considered all public input received. When it comes to CBAs, there are a few things to consider: the types of projects that would participate, their management, and funding. The first category for consideration, program participation, covers whether the county's CBA program should be voluntary, mandatory, or both. The second administration relates to whether the county or a third party should administer the CBA program, which may include assisting in negotiations, helping communities build coalitions, and facilitating the delivery of benefits. The third, program components, which deals with components to enhance and encourage participation in this community benefit agreement program. This table summarizes the CBA program options, which are presented in the action sheet attachment A for this item in today's agenda packet. The first action option, category 1, program participation. This option seeks direction on voluntary programs, mandatory programs, or both. It also seeks direction on the types of projects which may be exempted, such as agricultural projects, general plan consistent housing projects, and other project types that can be specified by the board. Again, we heard from land development and business group stakeholders that agriculture and housing projects should be exempted from CBAs because these uses in and of themselves are benefits to the community. The second action option, category 2, program administration, seeks direction on who should administer CBAs. In our best practice research, we found a local organization, the San Diego Foundation, has been used in previous voluntary CBAs to provide philanthropic services and benefits for donors. Their staff includes charitable giving experts, community needs advisors, local nonprofit resources, and grant makers. The third action option, category 3, program components, seeks direction on what benefits and incentives can be included within the program and whether staff would develop a preset options or determine on a case-by-case basis. It also covers whether expanded community engagement requirements should be placed on larger projects that would not qualify for mandatory CBA programs. Following board direction today, our next steps will be to include develop the program administration roles and responsibilities, prepare the necessary regulatory documents and return to the board for adoption, develop the applicant and community resource documents, and prepare and conduct additional public and stakeholder engagements as applicable to each future step. For today's requested board actions, we are asking you to find that the proposed actions are exempt from CEQA and receive this report and provide direction on the options presented. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you. Why don't we hear from our public speakers?
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We have 6 total requests to speak, 5 individuals in person, and 1 person requesting to speak by phone. Also like to note for the record, we did not receive any e-comments on this item. Any members of the public that have requested to speak on this item by phone, if you could please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that were provided to you. We'll begin with the in-person speakers. As your name is called, if you could please come forward and stand against the east wall under the murals until it is your turn to speak. I'd like to invite forward the following individuals: Jim Whalen, Christina Marquez, Michael Brando, Audra, and Kelly Batten. You'll have 2 minutes to address the board, and if you could please begin by stating your name for the record.
Good morning, almost. Jim Whalen, J. Whalen Associates. This is a lot easier item. First of all, thanks, staff. You did a killer job. I really appreciate it. I'm going to talk about 3 things. A, we've done a community benefit agreement. We just finished it a little while ago. It's coming in front of you with a solar project in a few weeks, and we know what works. We've worked on it a long time. We work closely with the community. We're going to have tangible benefits, basically improvements to the community center, which is in pretty bad shape. And the San Diego Foundation will hold the money, and there's a written agreement right now that we're going to do it. So we do know what works. Second thing, for the solar project, it's very important for the board to know that the economics of solar projects are quite tight. It's low margins a long time. So upfront costs are an issue, and whenever you come up with a community benefits plan, you need to take that into account. And I'll add another thing to the list, which is local hires. For years, I've been working on renewable projects, and you see a sea of RVs because all the workers come from outside town. When we come back to you later, I'll go in more detail about how we're able to do local hires. It's tricky, and I want to thank Christina Marquez for working with me. We've worked very closely together on coming up with something that we think you will like, and I urge support for 1C, 2B, 3A, B, and C. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Christina Marquez on behalf of IBW 569 and our 3,600 union electricians and power professionals. In strong support of the County of San Diego, furthering adoption of a policy that would make community benefit agreements mandatory for large-scale developments that have a significant impact on our communities. The county should facilitate mandatory community benefit agreements with a range of benefits such as project labor agreements or PLAs, which would help ensure local hire, prevailing wages, again, local hire, job outreach to underserved communities through partnerships with San Diego Building Trades Council. CBAs provide local economic opportunities, empowering communities by providing opportunities for workforce development. Supporting the community by increasing public engagement between a developer and community groups, and promoting environmental justice by ensuring equal access to the decision-making process to create healthy environments. We applaud the county on moving forward with pursuing and mandating CBAs, and for the greater benefit of our communities and local workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. And final call for Michael Brando and Kelly Batten.
Username Audra. Just confused because, I mean, you guys don't want community engagement. Or, I mean, maybe you do from the people that will pat you on the back, but not from people that may disagree with what you're saying. And that's a problem. I mean, think about when the people from Hukumba came in and they didn't want those solar panels in their town, and hundreds of people came, and then you guys are like, you know what, we're going to do that. We're going to, even though they were just begging and pleading because it's going to affect their whole life. So, I mean, to say you want community engagement is totally bogus unless it aligns with your thoughts. That's right, Nathan. That's why you're smiling. Yeah, exactly. But it's ridiculous because it's the stakeholders that you also want to hear from. Well, we are stakeholders in the game. So it's like you're not equitable in anything you do, especially this. And to say that you want to like hear people, I mean, you don't even care when they come. So, I mean, at some point you should actually listen to the public, because there's a whole bunch of us that don't want you doing what you're doing. But you're like, don't listen to them. We don't want to hear what they say. They're so bad. But I mean, don't we all have the right to freely express ourselves? I mean, you guys do it all the time, and we have to sit here and listen to it. And it's like, all we are is shut up. Shut up and sit down. Go to jail. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. Is that funny, Nora? Going to jail? I bet it was. I bet all of you were laughing about that. I bet. And you act like, oh, we're not the ones doing it. Yeah, you are. You're silencing people. You're like arresting people for clapping. So, I mean, if you wanted to hear from people, you would never do stuff like that. It's ridiculous. How many days have you spent in jail, Jim? Probably none. But you guys are okay sending people there for doing things that aren't even criminal. So I would don't claim things that are totally bogus.
I use the name Michael. I'm looking at your names over there. Scott Christman, Group Program Manager. Is that part of the Planning Commission? No.
Hey, they're not there to answer your questions. Address the board in your public comment time.
I didn't hear you, Nathan. What did you say?
I said the staff are not here in public comment to answer your questions. They're here for you. The time is for you to address the Board of Supervisors.
The staff is not here to answer questions?
Not during public comment, no.
Not during public comment. So it is staff. Davia Lynch, Lynette Tessitore, Chief, Long Range Planning, Scott Christman, Group Program Manager, Audrey Hamilton.
Is there some purpose to you reading out the names of staff
Randy,
other than to try to
this is
intimidate them?
part
The
of
board are
my-
the ones who make the decisions. Please direct your comments to the Board of Supervisors. We're the ones who make the decisions. Criticize us, say our names, do whatever you want. Please leave the county staff alone.
I'm not bothering the county staff. It's an agenda item, and these are the people that are promoting it.
No, the board are the ones who are considering and making the decision. Please direct your comments to the board.
Thank you, Nathan, for clarifying
You're welcome.
your rules. I really appreciate it. So I'll just end this on no on community benefits agreements. And thank you for having name holders so the community can research what you're doing.
And not.
Audrey, your outbursts are disrupting the conduct of the meeting. First warning.
Not seeing Kelly Batten come to the podium, we will now move to those that have requested to speak by phone. When it is your turn to speak, I'd like to remind you, you'll be unmuted and hear a recording that will tell you to begin your comments after the beep. I'd like to remind the callers they should mute their TV or live video stream before they begin speaking, and we'll begin with our caller.
Truth. Hey, Audrey, you can ask Tara about gel. She knows about it. And Joel, you do want dirty water, recycled wastewater, you liar.
The rural areas are not just places to put solar panels.
This item is talking about community benefits agreements to offset the environmental damages from toxic lithium-based infrastructure, such as wind turbines, electric vehicles, solar panels, transmission machinery, and lithium mining. Of course, a normal person would ask, why are these projects being pushed if they're hurting communities?
For these small communities. And as we continue to build solar projects and other major projects out there that benefit other communities, they're not getting a dime from that electricity. And yet, their neighborhoods completely impact for the next 30 years.
CBAs amount to bribes. And in this item, it's a measly $265,000 for people to sell out their communities. The following is information about the county's regional decarbonization framework. From the November 17th, 2021 meeting, here's how green lithium mining is, quote, environmental considerations, releasing lithium into the atmosphere, ecosystem damage, and the lack of recycling of lithium batteries, end quote. That toxic lithium-based infrastructure is flammable and unsustainable. Wind turbines are killing thousands of birds and bats. They're emitting low-frequency and electromagnetic emissions, and they can combust into flames. According to the August 18th San Diego Fire Rescue meeting, quote, in New York, there were 60 residential fires due to lithium batteries, up 233%. Batteries may release their energy and gases long after fire is extinguished. Rekindle is likely and can occur up to 21 days later, end quote. The threat to our climate from toxic lithium is real. The fire threat caused by lithium batteries is real. The toxic lithium crisis needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Your time is up. And Chair Fletcher, that concludes the request for non-agenda, or Chair Fletcher, that concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you. Let's go to Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
Yeah, first I just want to thank staff again. I feel like our team is just doing amazing work today, and this is another example of that. You've done just a tremendous amount of outreach, and I appreciate your diligence in looking globally at best practices, including models from the United Nations Free Prior Conformance Consent and the World Bank. And I think, you know, when we have projects that benefit the applicant but really have significant negative impacts on neighbors, it breeds distrust, frustration, it creates harmful effects. And I mean, honestly, it's just fundamentally unfair to have projects that, yes, absolutely bring a huge benefit to our region, but have such a negative impact on the local community that is not being compensated for and is not being taken into account. And so I think this is what's so incredibly exciting about the community benefits agreement proposal that you've brought forth, which is really, you know, creating a framework that emphasizes that kind of partnership between the developer and the community, that foregrounds our community voices and ensures that concerns are really mitigated and addressed from the very beginning, and that we end up at the end of the day with a project that benefits everyone, and that the burden is not unfairly shouldered by the folks who just happen to live the closest. So I think this is great. I'm going to make a motion, but I first just had a couple questions for staff, some clarifying questions. So just going to the action sheet, I just wanted to clarify for staff that if we look at number 3A, benefit options, if we were to develop a preset list of benefits, is that just a jumping off point for community engagement, or does that limit benefits to only those that are on the list?
Supervisor, through the chair, you are correct. This is a starting point for community engagement. The list would be a non-limiting list, so there could be additional items identified by the community and the developer.
Great. That's very helpful. And then similarly, on 3C, on the incentives, is that a limiting list, or is that a beginning jumping off point for a conversation?
Supervisor, through the chair, same as the first item. It's a starting point. It's a non-limiting list.
Great. So I'm going to make a motion then, just to kind of get us rolling. I'd like to make a motion to, first of all, to take option 1C, establish both voluntary guidelines and a mandatory program. I think that's a really helpful approach. It means that we're able to encompass both our very large projects, but also provide some frameworks and certainty for some of our smaller projects that really want to do the right thing by the community, but maybe haven't had the support and guidance on how to do so. So I think that bifurcation and being able to do the mandatory and voluntary is really important. So that's 1C. On the program components, moving down to 3A1, and then looking at my notes, moving down to 3B1 and 2, and then moving down to 3C1. And then so that's the beginning of my motion. I just wanted a clarifying question. It seemed in the staff brief that you're recommending that we do 2B. Wondering if we have to choose 2A versus 2B, or if we could choose both.
Supervisor, through the chair, there is an option to choose both. You can mix and match in terms of a mandatory program could have a county administration, while a voluntary program could have a third-party administration, for example.
Then I wasn't clear, it said an or, but if an and is a possibility, then I would choose 2A and 2B to give us the flexibility, to administer programs as appropriate using either the county or in a third party. So that would be my motion. Chair Fletcher, do I need to repeat it?
Yeah, can you walk back through it, and then include in the CEQA statement as well?
Yeah, and then also find that the proposed. So we'll start over from the beginning. So my motion is number 1, define the proposed actions are exempt from CEQA. Number 2, on the community benefits agreement program options, to go with 1C for program administration, 2A and 2B for 3 program components, 3A1 and 3B1 and 2, and for 3C1.
Got it. Okay, that's the motion. I'm happy to second. Appreciate the comments. This really came out of the Hucumba Solar project, an attempt to have a more systematic approach to community engagement around things, give people some predictability, kind of know what's expected, what should happen. All we're doing here is giving some input and direction. This will come back to us probably multiple times, and so we'll have a lot of opportunities to weigh in the development of this. It's just giving staff some kind of direction as we move forward. Let's go to Supervisor Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this is for Supervisor Lawson-Remer. In 1C, to establish both the voluntary and mandatory programs, and then it does then is ask to go back to 1B, and if there's any that you want to also make mandatory or exempt. So the mandatory one has, I guess, options for mandatory or exempt. And what they do have for mandatory in 1B is a mandatory program for projects requiring statements of overriding consideration. I'd also like to ask if we could add in the mandatory for projects that export benefits outside of the project area, which is what the community and planning and sponsor groups have requested, which was kind of the whole impetus of us doing this here today.
I'll respond to that. I would say, Supervisor Desmond, I agree with you in spirit. And I think from a policy standpoint, I think we're on the same page. Unfortunately, my understanding reading this is that is not permissible because there's not a sufficient nexus, and that you need to have in order for there to be a nexus for us to have a mandatory program, there needs to be a statement of overriding consideration, or else there's not a nexus. But what I would like to potentially kind of tweak your proposal to kind of go in a direction that I was thinking about as well, but seemed that it could potentially be legally permissible, which would be to ask staff as part of this to during the CBA program development to explore the viability of requiring project applicants to identify and address the social impacts of projects and report back to the board, which would then potentially create a pathway for a nexus for action for projects that are outside of, a statement of overriding consideration is not required.
Okay. Let's pause for just 1 sec and ask staff involved. Do we have the option to do mandatory requirements for anything other than a CEQA statement of overriding consideration?
Chair Fletcher, through our best practice research, this is the most viable option that we have in terms of creating a mandatory program. And it would be relying on the CEQA process and those projects within SOC.
Okay.
All right, that's fine. And then what is also asked, since you chose 1C, which I agree with, that is, are there any that you want to exempt? And that's in the 1B, little I, double little I, and triple little I. If you want to exempt, and I'm not sure if I want to exempt it at all, but I'm just curious if agriculture projects are general plan consistent, housing projects or other types you wanted to exempt as part of that motion?
No, I mean, there's so few projects that have a statement of overriding considerations, very few. And I think it's, the real point is that a lot of projects have huge benefits for our community, right? And that's wonderful. And we want to make sure that those projects can go ahead. But we just want to make sure there's also a mechanism for these great projects that are really important for San Diego County to also benefit the local community that's most closely impacted, and that would be true for any kind of project.
So no exemptions then?
No exemptions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's no amendment. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Let me restate the motion here. The motion is the CEQA compliance component 1C, 2A, 2B, 3A1, 3A2, no, I'm sorry, 3A1. Let me start over. The motion is the CEQA compliance statement 1C, 2A, 2B, 3A1, 3B1, 3B2, 3C1.
Yep.
All right, motion and second. Ask the clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. Supervisor Anderson. Aye. Supervisor Lawson-Remer.
Aye.
Supervisor Desmond.
Aye.
Vice Chair Vargas. Chair Fletcher.
Fletcher, aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all supervisors being present voting aye.
We'll now resume non-agendized public communication.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher. We still have 5 total requests to speak on matters not listed on the agenda, 1 in person and 4 by phone. For those that have requested to speak by phone, if you could please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that have been provided to you. We will begin with the 1 in-person speaker. I'd like to invite forward Consuelo. You'll have 2 minutes to address the board, and if you could please state your name before beginning your comments.
Consuelo, this was from yesterday, but I was kicked out of the chambers for clapping. Welcome to Achinica. I'm all for doing what we can to help our homeless brothers and sisters, but understand this, the only help government will ever give to this issue is contributing to it, in fact, perpetuating perpetuating it. Government is the reason why these problems exist. Throughout history, they've never made things better. Just look at what's happened within the past few years. We now have a way bigger problem due to their scamdemic. With all the taxes they've collected from us, they could have already easily helped all of the homeless wanting help, all the small businesses who were affected, but they didn't. Why? Because it's a part of the plan. It's the agenda. Wakey, wakey, 2030. Death to the hardworking upper and middle classes. You see it. Look around you. Open your eyes, unplug your TVs. Why is it so hard to accept? Things are not getting better. Government is only getting bigger. Government is not, have never been, and will never be the solution. They create the problems in order to appear as the heroes coming to save the people. They love an ignorant, consumed, obedient, above all, dependent society. A society who relies on them for everything. A society who only worships and praises them. A society who is purposely distracted by them. A society who is not paying attention. The majority of the people living here do not even know who the hell Nathan Fletcher is. They have no clue what district they even live in, but the ones paying close attention know every page, shill, and puppet are in this county. No, KNOW, government doesn't give two flying Fs about you or your well-being. Government does care only.
Thank you. We will now hear from those that have requested to speak by phone. When it is your turn to,
Your time has expired. Your continuing speaking is disrupting the conduct of the meeting. First warning. Your continued talking outside of the time allotted to you is disrupting the conduct of the meeting. Second warning. Your continued efforts are disrupting the conduct of the meeting. Third warning. Please leave.
we will hear from those that requested to speak by phone now. When it is your turn to speak, again, you'll be unmuted. You'll hear a recording that will tell you to begin your comments after the beep. I'd like to remind the callers they should mute their TV or lighted video stream before they begin speaking, and we will begin with the first caller. And again, if you could please state your name for the audio record.
Good afternoon. My name is Diane Grace. As both a mother and grandmother, yesterday I spoke about the DAB Walk in North County that was part of a national movement sponsored by Johnny's Ambassadors, a nonprofit alliance of parents and youth organizations who are concerned about the harms of youth marijuana use. Later in the day, I received photos from all over the United States from other DAB walks. And I heard from parents across the nation regarding their adult children's recent spiral into psychosis. A doctor responded that there seems to be an extremely common downward progression for marijuana users of high-concentrate THC dabs. Initially, there is a calming and pleasant high. As the frequency of dab use increases, there is a strong mix of anxiety and depression, and the young adult starts having paranoid thoughts, causing more anxiety, so they use more weed to calm their anxiety, which works for a few hours, but it worsens. Young adults then become socially withdrawn because of their anxiety, depression, and paranoia, but they increase usage to get that short-term calm. The buildup of THC over time starts causing manic episodes, delusions, hallucinations, and paranoia, resulting in suicidal and homicidal thoughts and behavior. This is the other side of the story when it comes to the potency of the current marijuana and how it negatively impacts youthful brains and behavior. Perhaps HHSA could ask what they could do to assist young people facing the new and difficult pitfalls related to pot use and addiction. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the next caller.
Ann Riddle, parent advocate. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to share the good news going on in North County regarding another city who is moving forward in prohibiting smoking of all tobacco products in public spaces. This is exciting, good news. And I pointed out that the Prevention Coalition, speaking in favor of this last City Council meeting last Wednesday, mentioned that in addition to removing the toxic smoke and the butts from the environment, that this would be excellent because youth would see less public smoking and vaping behavior, and it would be less likely than ever to be seen as healthy behavior. Well, this morning I received an informative brief from the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, and they wrote that smoking policies provide incentives to quit smoking and help denormalize smoking behavior and are particularly effective among youth and young adults who are vulnerable to visual cues and social norms of smoking, which made me wonder about marijuana smoking and what our young children and youth see and think and then decide upon as an action. And I'm gravely concerned about what they see, particularly the billboards that hang over our two major freeways. The Tobacco Control Consortium goes on to say that of particular concern with them are on-site consumption lounges, this indoor environment where electric vaporizers, vape pens, and dab rings can produce a chemical aerosol that pollutes indoor airs is extremely unhealthy, and that research shows that the diminished air quality even remains when the marijuana user has left the consumption lounge. Goes on to say that indoor particulate matter level from secondhand marijuana smoke.
Thank you. Your time is up. We'll go to the next caller.
This is Truth. One day at this meeting, I heard a rumor that I get paid to speak. If that's so, I wanted to notify the money dispenser that I'm still waiting for my payment, and I prefer cash, please. So if you could make that happen, that'd be great. But if my research on these horrible agenda items isn't enough to warrant payment, then I'd like to offer up a combination of my writing and editing services, matched with Audra's skills and accuracy of numbers and building contacts, in the form of impact reports for the county. For half the price, together we can provide shorter, more concise reports than the overpaid consulting groups these supervisors usually hire. So our new consulting group is called TNT 360 Sustainable Transition to Organize and Resist Misgoverning. And we're available to start work on reports required for upcoming agenda items. Come on, supervisors. A TNT 360 Storm can blow the competitors out of the water at half-price cash payments. Now, Jim, you said on September 13th that there are people that feel offended by clapping. If that's true, then there are definitely people that feel disrespected and offended by Joel staring at his phone every meeting. If you want, Joel, I can get you a neck brace to fix your permanently damaged posture. And lastly, Nathan, I wanted to make sure you know, Nathan, that everything you've said today doesn't really mean anything at all. Doesn't really matter what the topic was. All you continue to do is to display dishonorable conduct unbefitting a supervisor or a respectable veteran. It's almost like you're just trying to see how outrageous you can be. I hope you get control of your repeated cycles of anger one day, Nathan, because it's an embarrassing sideshow that you're jarred so easily. Grow up.
And Chair Fletcher, that will conclude requests for non-agenda public communication this afternoon.
That concludes the business before the board today. We stand adjourned.
The next regular meeting of the board will take place on Tuesday, October 11th, 2022 at 9 a.m.